This boy became the biggest nightmare of every hunter out there. Out of everyone who came to this world, he had a unique power that made him level up way faster than any other hunter. He dodged every single attack just by using his sharp instincts. That put a bounty on his head because everyone wanted his power. The hunters set up ambush after ambush, but he was always one step ahead and wiped out the whole group by himself. Over time he got so strong that 2 rival assassin guilds had to pause their own war just to team up and stop him. They actually managed to catch him, but it didn't last long. When he got captured and was about to be executed, his body unleashed a new evolution of his primal hunter power. He let out energy so strong it blew the whole army away. Then he took a deep breath and sliced through the assassins at the speed of light. The only way they held the kid down was when a mage trapped him in a barrier, locking him in place. Then one of the leaders managed to drive a spear straight into his chest. Everyone thought that was the end of him, but the boy had an ace up his sleeve. He spent a whole month inside a forbidden dungeon drinking poison to become an alchemist. He stayed in the poison so long that he came out immune with his weapons dripping poison. Even with the spear stuck in his chest, he smeared poison on the old man using his bare hands and left everyone in shock because he had turned into a monster. They tried to finish the guy off with a massive fire explosion, but he used teleportation and slipped away again. This boy is Jake, and he has the most broken skill for dodging and surviving, Primal Hunter. Today he can be this fierce and confident guy, but it wasn't always like that. Before everyone got summoned to this world, Jake and his coworkers were grinding away at an office job. He was just an average guy, a loner, who couldn't even hold a conversation with others, basically an invisible antisocial type. He spent his days at the office watching time crawl by slowly, feeling like he was wasting his life. The only thing he'd trained since he was a kid was a totally solo sport, archery. Until one day Adam, a more easygoing guy, invited him to have lunch with the group, and for the first time Jake actually said yes. In the elevator, they bumped into Caroline and another girl, and they thought it was weird seeing Jake hanging out with the group. It was in this chill moment that everything changed. A loud bang shook the elevator, and panic hit instantly. Adam figured it was some electrical glitch, but when the second bang hit, even the lights went out completely. Talk about bad luck. The one time this guy decides to actually go out with the group, all this chaos happens. Lucky for him, it wasn't the elevator breaking down. It was actually the start of a whole new beginning. A system screen popped up telling the entire world that the tutorial for this new reality had begun. Somewhere that feels like another realm, someone takes interest in Earth's start. To him, it just means more lambs to slaughter. In a white room, Jake wonders where he is. A gray being appears and welcomes him. Its look catches MC off guard. The being says it's here to explain the new reality, but it doesn't have much time. At first, Jake can't make sense of any of it. Then his own system window pops up, showing his stats. The being says this new reality has rules he needs to learn. Earth is now part of a multiverse, and he'll get more answers when the time comes. He can't tell if this is amazing or completely insane. The being moves on to classes. A set of weapons appears, and Jake knows he has to choose one. Each weapon gives different stat boosts and proficiencies, but the system lays it out clearly. Before long, the protagonist finds one he likes. The system announces that he chose the archer class. The being ends the introduction and says MC will be sent to the tutorial zone, the Great Forest. It's dangerous, but also perfect for beginners. Monsters there can be killed for tutorial points, which can be used to gain stronger skills. There's even a chance to hunt a monster lord. The tutorial will last 64 days, and survivors will be rewarded based on their points. Jake starts teleporting, adrenaline rushing through him. That thrill actually makes him smile. Then he reaches the Great Forest. Everyone from the elevator is there too, now wearing different clothes, and no one knows where they are. Jake sees his bow and thinks this might not be so bad. The place is massive. Adam tells everyone to stay calm. They're all confused. Then the ground starts moving. Adam shouts for everyone to keep calm as they begin to fall. Jake would later wish he had known it wasn't only monsters doing the hunting. Elsewhere in the forest, another group wonders if someone is following them. Their leader tells the hidden person to come out. A blonde boy steps out and apologizes, saying he was only looking for his team. A woman in the group says he's just a kid. No one's going to hurt him. They ask where he last saw his group, and he says they got split up after a fight when everyone fell. The leader says they could be anywhere by now, so he offers to let the boy stay with them while they help search for his team. The boy agrees and thanks them. He was terrified walking around alone. Back with Jake's group, one woman asks what they should do, while another guy doubts what the alien said about this new world. Adam steps up and says they need to handle it one step at a time. He can't help thinking Adam was made for this. Adam says their first needs are shelter, water, and food. Jake figures they probably aren't the only survivors out here. It's also the right time to learn their skills and understand the system. One good thing, the group's skills seem pretty balanced. Then an arrow flies and drops the creature Adam was facing. Jake fired it to back him up. He's also glad Caroline turned out to be a healer and learned fast. By night, the group is gathered around a campfire. Caroline says the protagonist is really good with a bow. All he thinks is that she finally knows his name. Someone jokes about missing work, then says they'll all need each other when things get bad. Later, Adam walks over to Jake. MC admits he's not ready for much, he's bad with words. Adam tells him the old rules don't matter in this new world. Hours later, during the first night watch, the purple-haired woman tells Jake she was supposed to be having lunch with her husband that day, and now everything feels unreal. Then she asks if he has a girlfriend. He thinks maybe not anymore. Back in college, he had two real friends, Andrew and Madeline. Andrew was his roommate, someone he trusted with his life, and the protagonist was in love with Madeline. The three of them weren't social, but they liked being alone together. To Jake, those were the happiest 2 years of his life, but he was blind to what was happening right in front of him. Not knowing any of that, the woman says maybe being alone is better, but thinking about her husband makes her nervous. Jake feels like he should say something, but she excuses herself and walks off. MC thinks about Adam calling him a leader, Joanna Elkman opening up to him, and Caroline finally remembering his name. Maybe things really are different now. Then a scream tears through the forest. He runs toward it. He finds 3 men surrounding Joanna Elkman. They demand to know what group she belongs to. Terrified, she says she doesn't know. Their leader says her reaction gives it away, then smashes her leg. Right after her scream, a storm of arrows flies in. One man takes a hit to the neck. Another blocks with a big axe. The leader spots where the shots came from and orders his men to grab the attacker. The axe user charges in, but finds nobody, confused about where the archer went. Jake suddenly appears behind him, an arrow in hand. He tries to drive it into the man's neck, but the attack gets blocked. The protagonist is thrown back. The man comes at him with the axe, swinging with full force, but Jake catches it with his bow. He knows Joanna Elkman is hurt and wonders where the third man is. Then he glances aside and spots the leader. The man is charging in with a hammer, and Jake realizes there's still another enemy besides him. An arrow is already flying at him too. MC thinks this is it, but then something changes. Time seems to slow, though it isn't magic or a spell. The system announces that his primordial hunter bloodline has awakened. Jake understands it's pure instinct. He dodges the hammer, snatches the incoming arrow out of the air, and throws it back another way, straight into the axeman's heart. He can't believe he just did that, but he doesn't stop. He rushes for a blade and slashes the leader. More arrows come at him, and he knocks them aside with the blade before charging the hidden archer. The shooter is hiding in the brush. He even tries to fight Jake head-on, but he grabs his clothes and demands to know who he is. Then the protagonist takes one of the man's arrows and drives it into his eye. The young archer drops, blinded. Jake grabs another arrow and stabs him in the chest, then does it again. Just then, the rest of MC's group arrives and asks if they're okay. They stop in shock when they see him on the ground beside the dead archer. Breathing hard and thrilled, he says he won. Jake is reminded of school, when a girl was being bullied. 3 boys forced her to help them cheat on a test or face trouble. They said no one would notice if she passed them the answers while the teacher wasn't looking. She offered to help them study instead. One of the boys shoved her and called that pointless. Jake stepped in, trying to help her. The bully snapped, asking what he thought he was doing. The protagonist punched him, but it changed nothing. When it came to good guys and bad guys, no one cared about the difference. He got suspended right along with the bully. Back in the present, Caroline asks if Jake is okay. He says he's fine. The blood isn't his. Then the system shows he earned tutorial points for killing the other survivors. MC stares at the screen, excited, and notices a new skill while wondering what this bloodline really is. Adam asks why those men attacked. Jake says it was probably for tutorial points. Since he got a lot just by fighting alone, they need a new plan to survive, not just hide. Adam thinks they should just wait for the tutorial to end. Caroline calls out to him and asks why Joanna Elkman was by herself. He says Joanna Elkman stepped away because she was feeling anxious and needed space. Annoyed, Caroline says Joanna Elkman is in terrible shape. She adds that her healing can't fix Jonah's broken leg. The protagonist asks if this is his fault, but Adam cuts in and reminds her that the protagonist saved Joanna Elkman. Still, Adam says he never should have let her go alone and should have woken everyone up. MC apologizes, saying he had to choose fast and went with his gut. Adam tells him to think next time. They're people, not animals, and Joanna Elkman could have died. Jake apologizes again. Caroline snaps, asking what he would have done if Joanna Elkman had really died. After that, the whole group goes quiet. He steels himself and fires back, telling Caroline to calm down. He says Joanna Elkman is alive because of him, and if he'd woken everyone, things could have gone even worse. Those attackers were humans, not monsters, and he asks if Adam could really kill someone. Jake says the world has changed. They can't sit around waiting for rescue like kids. They have to adapt if they want to live. Another guy in the group asks what they're supposed to do then. The protagonist says they need to level up. They have to do what the system wants, and he won't be blamed for adjusting faster than the others. By morning, someone finally wakes up. It's Jake, and he starts talking with Casper. MC says he was waiting for Casper to wake up after being left alone by everyone else. Casper brings up everything that happened, and the two talk it through. After that, they decide to carry their own weight. He thinks about how Casper worked in research and development at his old job, and along with Adam, was one of the people he knew best. The two had bonded over their sad love lives. Looks like that closeness is still there. Then Jake notices Joanna Elkman. Casper says they couldn't save her leg, so they had to amputate it, and it was her idea. Still, they're hoping Caroline can restore it after leveling up, and the protagonist is impressed by how tough Joanna Elkman is. That day, everyone pushed themselves. Jake says Bertram was one of the strongest fighters, while Joanna Elkman used her magic well, but Caroline stood out the most. What happened to Joanna Elkman clearly changed something in her. Even with potions, nothing helped Joanna Elkman's leg, and no one knew why Caroline ended up being targeted. After the argument that night, MC and Caroline didn't say a word to each other. He keeps wondering which one of them will speak first. Maybe acting like nothing happened is best, and for now, that seems fine. About an hour later, Casper asks if the protagonist is really sure about this training, and the protagonist says yes. Casper gets ready to throw a ball at him. MC figures he should sense it by focusing and steadying his breathing. Instead, it smacks him right on target. Jake wonders why it isn't working. Maybe his perception only kicks in during real danger. Adam shows up and says they need to stop and look for a place to stay before night. They find a cave that seems safe and good enough to keep out the rain. He thinks a cave would make an ambush harder. If they stay alert, everyone should be okay. Adam asks if Jake is still thinking about last night. The protagonist says he won't make the same mistake again. Adam apologizes for being so hard on him, saying MC didn't deserve all that. Then he says he'll go ahead and find the best spot deeper inside the cave. Jake thinks the group might not have survived day one without Adam. Honestly, he himself might be dead if not for him. He remembers Adam back at work, saying he wanted the protagonist on his team, and even offering to take him out to lunch. Then a strange noise echoes through the cave. Joanna Elkman asks what that sound was. When it comes again, everyone gets ready. Suddenly, rocks start dropping from the ceiling. Jake shouts that they need to get out. Adam immediately orders everyone to run. They rush ahead while more rocks keep falling. Caroline falls behind, and MC calls out to her. Huge chunks of rock are crashing down over her. Jake stops and turns back. Then he bolts toward her at full speed. He reaches Caroline and pulls her clear of the cave-in. The two barely make it to safety, but they're cut off from the rest of the group. Jake asks if her wound is okay. She says yes. From the other side, Adam calls for him and asks if they can hear him. Caroline answers that they're still here. Jake tells everyone to stay quiet since the cave is unstable. There could be something else hiding in there too. Caroline says the rocks blocking the way can't be moved. Bertram wants to smash through from the other side, but Adam says that's too risky. Joanna Elkman refuses to just leave the protagonist and Caroline behind. Adam says there may be another route through the cave, so they should keep moving and look for one. Jake doubts there really is another exit, but he knows Adam's plan is still the safest, so he says he'll head deeper in and try to meet them from the other side. Even so, he knows they have no idea what kinds of beasts might be down there. MC is fine for now, but he wonders if he can protect Caroline too. Caroline calls out to Adam that they're okay and not about to die in this cave. Jake can't help liking her confidence. Realizing how bad things are, Adam wonders if going in here was a mistake. Bertram says he and Caroline may have a better shot in there than the rest of them do. Even if the protagonist makes him uneasy, he's still the strongest one they have, and Caroline can heal. Adam asks what Bertram means by that. Bertram says he agrees with Jake about needing to grow stronger, and reminds Adam that he saw it too. MC laughing in a pool of blood like he'd lost his mind. Adam says he had barely survived, so a little strange behavior isn't something he can judge him for. Bertram says hard times change people, and the protagonist feels dangerous now. Even so, Adam says Jake is his friend, and he's choosing to trust him. Meanwhile, MC and Caroline keep moving through the cave. Caroline notices he's injured, and he says it probably happened when he threw himself at her. She offers to heal him. Jake asks if she's still mad at him. Caroline says an argument isn't a reason to let his wounds get infected. The protagonist thinks he should remember those conversation classes and try to start talking, but before he can, Caroline tells him to be more careful. Strong or not, he's not invincible. They're still learning these spells, and she won't be able to fix everything. Jake asks why she picked healer. She answers by asking why he chose archer. MC says it felt right, and it seemed like the best way to survive. Caroline nods and explains her own choice. She says she didn't know much, but in the games she played, healer was always the least popular class. Jake tries to ask if she still plays, but she says no. Caroline explains that her little brother spent much of his childhood in the hospital, so when she couldn't see him in person, they played online games together. He realizes he never knew she had a brother. She says people always told her to play healer, just because she was a girl, and at first she hated that. She wanted to be a fighter and deal big damage, but once she tried it, she learned that class had a hard time finding a team. As a healer though, Everybody wanted her. So in the end, she says it didn't matter what game it was. Someone always needed her. Healing also gave her protection, even when things got dangerous. Caroline finishes by saying she'll survive. Jake can tell she's smarter than he gave her credit for. Then she asks if he thought she was dumb, or if he just never really thought about it. The protagonist realizes he'd always had a crush on her, but never truly stopped to see her as a person. Caroline finishes wrapping his wound, and says he's all set, so they should keep moving. A little farther in, Jake finds the path splitting in two. Caroline asks which way they should go. Then they hear sounds coming from inside the walls. MC stays still, focused, while Caroline calls to him. He asks if she felt that too. His perception skill hasn't activated, but he can feel something under the tunnel. At that moment, several pairs of eyes are watching them. Jake realizes something awful must be nearby, but he can't figure out what this feeling is. His instincts warn him to be careful, yet another part of him is pulled toward it, so Jake tells Caroline they should check it out. Whatever is down there is strong, he says, but it could mean a lot of experience points. Caroline refuses. She just wants to find the others. He argues they don't even know where the group is, and they might be down that path. Caroline says if no one is there, they'll just walk straight into danger, and the other tunnel matches the direction the group went. The protagonist says only one path clearly promises XP, and that seems like exactly what the tutorial wants. Caroline fires back that this is real life, so his game logic doesn't work. Jake knows she has a point. Truth is, he's really just looking for another fight. Caroline says maybe that's exciting for him, but the others are only trying to live. MC asks what's wrong with wanting to become stronger. For once, they have a chance to be different, to do things no normal human ever could before. He asks if, even after all this, she still only wants to survive. Caroline says some of them actually liked the old world. They never asked to become killers. Then she tells him to think about the group and stop being selfish. Right then, more sounds ripple through the cave walls. Jake realizes arguing won't get them anywhere, so he gives in and agrees to take the safer path. Caroline thanks him, and they keep going. With the others, Joanna Elkman wonders if he is okay, and hopes they haven't run into monsters. Casper says that if Jake is with Caroline, they're probably fine. The hard part is just getting through the cave. Even with the protagonist's sharp perception, seeing far in there would still be tough. As it gets late, Bertram suggests to Adam that they camp and keep searching in the morning, but Adam wants to press on. Bertram says the search can continue tomorrow, and tells Adam to think about Joanna Elkman too. Even though Caroline says she's okay, Adam refuses to stop until the two of them are safe. So they keep moving through the cave. A moment later, Casper asks if anyone else heard that. Adam tells everyone to be ready. Bertram asks Casper if he can make anything out, but Casper says it's too dark. Footsteps echo through the cave, and Adam moves forward carefully, ready to fight. The steps keep getting closer, and Casper notices they're coming fast. Then he finally spots something rushing toward them. Adam raises his torch and calls out for Caroline. It turns out Jake and Caroline found the group. Caroline runs up and jumps toward Adam. Everyone is relieved to see them safe. Bertram asks if anything happened on the way, and MC starts answering, stumbling over his words. Caroline cuts in and says nothing happened. They just did a lot of walking. That answer leaves Jake feeling awkward. Caroline asks them to find another cave to sleep in, one that's less likely to collapse. But then Joanna Elkman notices something. She smacks a small spider with her staff and quickly says sorry for the noise. Casper tells her not to kill spiders, since they matter to the ecosystem. He lifts one into his hand and starts talking about it. Then he says he'll move it somewhere safer. After looking it over, he lets it go, but then notices a lot more spiders on the ceiling. Then Casper says there has to be some kind of nest nearby, though he also claims spiders aren't dangerous to humans right now. What he doesn't see is one creeping toward his neck. Adam rushes to help, but the spider bites Casper first. Hearing that, Jake readies his bow. At once, more spiders start dropping from the ceiling. Joanna Elkman gets into position and asks what they should do, but Casper says he can't move. Then a cluster of eyes appears in the dark, and Jake freezes when he sees why. A giant yellow spider has shown up. Casper still can't move, stuck right in front of the huge monster. Panicking, he calls out for the others. Then an arrow flies straight into the giant spider's mouth. Adam sprints in, grabs Casper by the arm, throws him over his shoulder, and yells for everyone to run. Meanwhile, Jake keeps firing at the spider. The others can only watch as he keeps launching arrows, but now the spider starts blocking the shots. The monster, Mammoth, is level 13. Jake is thrilled by that. Meanwhile, Casper and Bertram run, while Caroline helps Joanna Elkman get away, and Adam moves fast with them. Bertram soon shouts that everyone needs to get out now. Adam calls for Jake, but after grabbing his bow again, he apologizes while drawing his blade. He refuses to let this chance go. The spider gets ready to strike, but Jake rushes in and slashes at it. His blade tears across the monster's belly. Caroline says they can't keep waiting for the protagonist, but Adam refuses to leave anyone behind. A moment later, the spider lands a direct hit on MC. He goes flying into the wall, and the impact shakes loose rocks from above. Adam sees it and starts to worry, but Jake gets back up, saying that wasn't much for a spider. At the same time, he feels something boiling inside him. Then the system says his primordial hunter bloodline has awakened, and his whole mood shifts. Jake pulls another arrow from his quiver. The spider stays poised to attack, but with his instincts kicking in, he is ready for anything. Then a huge rock starts falling. The protagonist realizes the cave is caving in, but he still won't run from this fight. He even admits to himself that he really is selfish. Caroline's words come back to him. Not everyone hated their old life, but Jake definitely did. To him, getting stronger is what matters most, no matter what. Adam warns that the whole place is going to collapse. They don't have time for this. Then he realizes Jake isn't hearing any of it, because the archer is still focused on the giant spider. MC senses an attack coming from the left, and dodges it with ease. He also feels a slower strike coming from behind. For a second he wonders if he should dodge or block, but he decides he has to attack. He steadies himself and waits for the perfect opening, but his strike cuts into someone's arm, and Jake immediately knows something is wrong. A hand grabs him from behind and drags him back. It was Adam, snapping him back to reality. Adam begs him not to die over this. Jake says nothing, then locks onto something else. As the cave keeps falling apart, the two of them run out. The spider is left behind as rocks crash down. Outside, Joanna Elkman asks where Adam and he are. A moment later, both of them make it out. Caroline notices Adam is bleeding, and Jake admits he cut him by mistake, thinking he was the spider. Caroline is about to ask why the protagonist always chases fights, but Adam cuts in and says it's fine. Bertram disagrees. Being reckless is one thing, but hurting a teammate is another. He says they can't just ignore that. Adam brushes it off as a scratch and says Caroline can heal him, but Bertram argues the group will never work if they're always scared Jake will lose control. That makes MC realize this is how they all see him. Even Caroline sees him as a killer. Bertram adds that moments like this will only get worse. Jake admits they may be right. Maybe he's a danger to the group, or maybe the group is a danger to him. He remembers getting hit in his blind spot because he worried about Joanna Elkman, and saving Caroline is what made him fall into that cave trap. Now Adam stopped him, and they could have killed that giant spider. His thoughts break when something rustles in the bushes. Then someone calls out to Jake. He points an arrow at the sound and asks who's there. A man steps out and introduces himself as Richard. He says he heard the cave-in and came to check, adding that he means no harm. Adam and the protagonist trade a look after hearing that. Richard says he wants no trouble and is glad to finally meet other humans. The rest of his group seems to agree. He explains that his team and two others have already joined up for the tutorial, and says bringing more people together has worked out well. One young blonde guy in Richard's group looks especially pleased by that. Richard says he gets it if they're unsure, but combining groups would be better for everyone. Behind Adam, Caroline shrinks back, clearly uneasy. Richard then asks if she's a healer. Right away, Jake understands what he wants. Healers are always valuable, and Richard keeps talking as he says their healer died, and they're running low on potions. With a hand on his sword, he says he doesn't need all of them, only anyone who wants to come. Still, he adds that if the healer comes alone, that would be even better. Jake breaks into a cold sweat, but stays quiet. Adam asks what happens if they refuse. Richard answers that he's a peaceful man who likes settling things calmly so everyone stays happy. Then his tone shifts, and he adds that peaceful or not, he's taking the healer either way. Jake knows he has to slow down and think. His whole group is worn out, and he's the only one with enough energy left to fight. Maybe he can drop Richard with a surprise shot. But even if he does, how many arrows would it take, and what about the rest of them? Richard says Caroline won't be harmed since they need her. Jake knows running isn't possible. The other side has more people. Then Adam speaks up and tells everyone they're going with the other group, though Joanna Elkman doesn't like the way those people are staring at them. Casper says Richard doesn't seem so bad. Surviving in a place like this without a healer must be hard. Adam asks Caroline what she thinks, and she says she just doesn't want to fight. Jake hates that his group is even considering it. Caroline says she trusts Adam's choice. So Adam starts agreeing to join Richard's group, and MC thinks maybe that could actually help them. Then he asks Richard what level he is. Richard says he's level 9, and several others in his group are level 7 or higher. Then he asks who Jake is. He thinks that's perfect. He says he's disappointed. He expected Richard to be stronger. Then he adds that his name is Go to Hell, and his level is Go Screw Yourself. Adam asks what Jake is doing. Richard says he thought they were close to a deal. The protagonist tells him not to worry. He's the only one not joining, because he's got a hunt to finish. First though, he warns Richard to watch over his group, or they'll settle things later. Then he asks if Richard understands that he isn't the predator here. Jake draws his blade and asks how fast Richard's archer really is. Would that guy be faster than MC cutting off a head? Richard clearly doesn't like where this is going. Jake turns to his group and says he'll be watching them. As he walks away, he tells himself Caroline should be safe, because they need her, and if they want her willing to heal, they'll need to protect Adam too. With that much on the line, Richard should think twice before touching the others, which matters because he doesn't want them hurt. He just hopes he's right, but Adam tells the protagonist to wait. Casper also asks what that was supposed to mean, wanting to know if Jake is really leaving the group. MC says yes, he has other goals in the tutorial. Still, he says joining up will help the group and give them a better chance to survive. Then he tells them not to worry about him. Just then, someone calls for Jake to wait. Adam reaches into his bag and hands over some potions, telling him to be careful. The protagonist is touched by that. At last, he thanks Adam, not just for the potions but for everything until now. Then Jake leaves the group behind. That young blonde guy from Richard's team starts heading off too, but gets stopped. Richard tells his archer he already knows what to do. The man agrees with his leader. Out in the forest, that archer mutters that this is all a waste of time. If they weren't trying so hard to get close to the healer, he would have shot Jake in the back while he was walking away. Another man says MC might not even be level 5, but then 2 arrows suddenly fly out. They pierce the eyes of the man standing beside the archer. The archer and the others stare in shock, wondering what just happened. Another arrow flies out and kills one more teammate while the survivors still have no idea where the shots are coming from. Panic hits, and they split up at once. The dark forest hides Jake well. The archer ducks down with one other man, both scanning the area. Then a bush rustles nearby. The archer is sure he found the attacker and sends his partner in first. The man moves ahead carefully, searching for tracks. But he notices too late. Jake is right behind him, dagger already raised. He cuts him down in one quick strike. Right then, the archer spots him and lands an arrow on Jake. The protagonist rips it out and stares back, almost excited. 2 more arrows fly. MC dashes behind the trees for cover, avoiding both shots. After that, he starts watching for an opening, while the enemy archer stays hidden. The man reaches for another arrow, and Jake gets ready to move. The archer assumes he vanished. Then he fires. His shot snaps a branch, sending it swinging toward Richard's archer, who blocks it with his arm. He looks around, trying to find Jake, but the protagonist is already behind him, dagger in hand. He drives the blade into the man from behind and drops on top of him, murmuring that he can hear him. The last survivor begs Jake to stay back, but he only gives her a cold stare. Back with the others, Richard asks for more information about MC. Adam says there isn't much. They only worked together before all this. Richard points out they looked pretty close when they said goodbye. Adam answers that he used to manage the office, so looking after his team was normal. Richard says he respects that, and tells Adam not to see him as an enemy, even after the tension earlier. He adds that no one in the camp will be abused. Everyone needs each other to live. Adam asks what camp he means. Richard says not everyone from his group is here, and welcomes them to their base. It isn't much, he says, but they improve it every day. Caroline admits it seems decent. There are plenty of other newcomers too, and Casper is instantly impressed when he spots a pretty woman. Adam asks Caroline what she thinks. She says it may not be fancy, but it's way better than the cave. Richard says some of his people will show them where to sleep, and tells everyone to settle in. Then Casper hears something, and asks if the others heard it too. It turns out to be the last member of the archer's squad, running back. Richard immediately calls for the guards. The young blonde fighter draws his weapon. Adam has no clue what's going on, but someone quickly says the woman is one of theirs. She rushes in, calling for Richard. He asks where Nicholas and the rest are, and she says they're all dead. Richard first assumes Nicholas betrayed him, and asks if the archer killed the squad, but she says he's dead too. Now Richard is completely lost. The woman explains that Jake ambushed everyone Richard sent. Richard demands to know how she survived if he killed the rest. She says the protagonist spared her only to send a message to their leader. According to her, MC said Nicholas fought well, and that the warning he gave before was no joke. Richard angrily asks if Jake said anything else, and she answers that the guy isn't normal, he enjoyed it. To her, he is a monster. Out in the forest, the protagonist looks for somewhere to rest, and finally checks his system notices. They list his recent kills and show that he's reached level 7, with 1 free point to spend. He realizes he leveled several times during those fights. With 3 points total, Jake considers stamina and vitality, in case sleepless nights become normal, but perception should work better with his bloodline skill. So he puts the points there. On his status screen, he sees he has less than a third of his health left. That reminds him how skilled the enemy archer was. Without Caroline to heal him, he'll have to be much more careful. Adam's potions can help, but he needs to save them. Then he snaps out of it, and notices he's surrounded by hungry wolves. About the worst timing possible. Back at camp, the young blonde man walks over to Caroline. He confirms she's the healer, and Caroline recognizes him as one of Richard's fighters. He apologizes if he startled her, and says he's not one of the crazy ones. Introducing himself as William, Caroline says he looks younger than the others. He laughs and says that's exactly why he has to act tough. Nobody wants a 19-year-old on the team. He tries to seem intimidating, then claims he's just a normal guy trying to survive. Caroline starts to feel bad for him, but William gives her a sly smile. By the next morning, a pile of wolves lies dead in the forest. A rabbit hops near some leaves, and a hand suddenly shoots out of them. It's Jake, waking up and wondering how long he was out. He quickly realizes it's morning and that he's filthy, but he doesn't care if more fighting is coming. Now on his own, he decides it's time to get moving. Before long, he hunts one of the rabbits, then goes after a bird. After that, he brings down a boar. Later, he even kills a large lion. That pushes Jake all the way to level 10 in a single day. Then he notices something shining in a tree, and wonders what it is. It doesn't feel like a trap, so he decides to check it out himself. Jake starts climbing higher and higher toward the glow. Soon he finds a hollow in the tree with a jewelry box inside. He takes it, and the system announces that it contains a rare, powerful item. Jake can't quite understand how the system made something like this. It feels like a weird loop. Inside the box is a pair of enchanted bracelets that boost all stealth attacks. MC likes that right away, and the extra stats help too. Then he notices one more item inside, an upgrade token for any basic tutorial item. He considers using it on his bow, even though it's already pretty useful. Then thinks about his cloak instead. If it can be repaired, upgrading it would be worth it. So he uses the token on the cloak, giving it cut resistance and self-repair. It isn't as great as the bracelets, but the upgrade is still solid. And since jewelry boxes are rare, Jake figures finding even one more would be huge. He remembers the giant spider cave is far away, but if this works like a game, that place was probably guarding something valuable. Too bad he can't return after the collapse. Still, as he looks out, he figures there may be other caves nearby. A few hours later, he reaches a different one. He doesn't sense any monsters, but something about the cave feels special. Grinning at the thought of a new challenge, he heads inside with a torch. There, Jake notices blue mushrooms and then spots a wooden door where it shouldn't be. The rotten wood tells him it's been there a long time. Suddenly, a system message appears. He's discovered a dungeon challenge. He qualifies to enter because he's level 10, has no profession, and ranks in the top 5 for tutorial points. Inside the passage, Jake wonders what kind of place this is. The system warns him that he must survive every challenge in the dungeon, or the penalty is death. The protagonist stares at the screen, confused, then notices a necklace has appeared on him. The amulet is given to everyone who enters, and it also works as a small storage pouch. Jake guesses the necklace must matter for the challenge. Then it starts glowing, leaving him even more confused. He figures something has to be inside, and a tiny blue creature pops out. Jake asks what it is, but when he reaches for his blade, he realizes it's gone. In fact, all his weapons have vanished. The blue creature lunges at him, but MC quickly notices something. This little monster is pathetic. It yells that it'll show him, though Jake is more shocked that it can talk. As he steps back, he hits a button on the floor. A huge spike shoots from the wall at high speed, and he barely dodges. Realizing it's a trap, the spike slams deep into the opposite wall. The creature says that was nicely done. Jake then sees the wall starting to melt where the spike struck, so getting hit is not an option. He asks if this place is some kind of deadly trap, and the creature says he has no idea. He's just an idiot stuck inside the necklace. That catches the protagonist off guard, but the little monster says he has a bigger problem, because more spikes are coming now. Jake knows he can deal with the creature later. Right now, he just has to reach the end of the corridor. He bursts forward, jumping and pushing off the walls. The little monster admits he didn't do too badly. Jake asks if the thing is going to follow him around, and the imp says it's not like he has anywhere else to go. MC reaches another room filled with platforms leading to a door. The system says he must collect 5 silver mushrooms in the next area. Now he sees why the necklace's storage will help. He also notices the big wall is full of holes, which probably means more acid spikes will fire once he starts gathering mushrooms. The creature suggests he might use those holes to figure out the attack paths and choose a safer route. Jake then thinks about the snake eating the mushrooms. So what would a winged serpent eat? He remembers the image only showed worshippers bowing to it. The protagonist says he really doesn't like where that thought is heading, so he makes a small cut on his hand and throws it. Jake throws his blood onto the platform drawing. It works, and Cecil jokes that he hopes humans have plenty of blood. MC says it only stings a little, though way too much blood is coming from such a tiny cut. Cecil points out a safe route with just 3 jumps to make, and he knows he has to keep going. He leaps again and keeps moving across the platforms toward the end, but then reaches a spot where he slips on his own blood and starts sliding. Jake figures the dagger changed his body, and the blood loss is finally hitting him. Even so, he keeps pushing forward. The protagonist makes one more jump onto the next platform. Then he goes for another, but his body suddenly gives out. Cecil realizes he won't make the jump, and Jake drops toward the acid river, completely drained. But at the last second, he catches the edge. Using everything he has left, MC hangs on. Cecil urges him to climb. He's almost there. Jake already knows that, but his foot is nearly touching the acid. With his last bit of strength, he pulls himself up and starts dragging his body out, though he thinks he still won't make it because the acid has eaten through his leg. In that moment, Jake is sure he's about to die. Still, he keeps fighting and crawling. He refuses to end here. Cecil flies over to help and tries to pull him, even though he's too heavy, insisting he'll manage it. As Jake crawls toward the exit, he notices his vision starting to blur and his body feels ready to shut down. He forces that thought away and keeps using everything he has just to move forward. Then the system announces he cleared the room and his health is fully restored. Cecil starts calling Jake back, and the protagonist's body begins to heal. Only then does he realize he survived. Cecil jokes that MC already died once, and MC notices his body is completely normal again. No acid burns, even his clothes are restored. But Cecil quickly reminds him they don't have much time, and that's when Jake remembers there's still one last room. He only asks for a minute to catch his breath. He practically just died. That was the first time in the tutorial he truly faced death. He enjoys risky fights and dodging deadly attacks, but dying alone in acid inside a cave isn't something he can accept. He says that with a smile to Cecil, and the imp gets it. He spent ages trapped in the necklace, thinking he'd never see another living thing. That changed how he sees things. Jake decides this dungeon is awful, so he won't let it kill him. Soon, the two reach the final room. This time, the platforms are neatly arranged. Cecil suggests using the mushroom trick again, but Jake thinks the room is trying to fool him. He studies the middle row and finds the third image, but it only shows a wyvern on a mountain, with no clear hint. At first he thinks the beast is roaring in anger, but then he realizes that's not it. Jake starts thinking back to his own past, and it hits him. The creature wasn't angry, it was roaring out of fear. Now the protagonist knows what to do. He starts walking forward, and Cecil warns him the blue light is still active, asking what he's doing as Jake speeds up. Then he jumps with everything he's got, and lands on the platform. Cecil gets so scared he can't even watch. As Jake keeps jumping, he says courage is the answer. Fear has to be faced. He remembers that his old world had no place for someone like him, because fear is beaten by willpower. He keeps flashing back while leaping forward without backing down, remembering when he left his group and still kept moving against his fear with courage. Each platform collapses right after he jumps from it. The system announces the third room is cleared, and Cecil cheers. After that, all of Jake's stats and skills are restored. He finally feels his body return to normal, and Cecil says he really is crazy. Then the system says MC cleared the Hidden Courage Challenge, unlocking a bonus room. Jake is caught off guard by that. Soon, the duo enters the bonus room, and there doesn't seem to be another trial. There's only a huge mural, like it's telling a story. A snake ate countless mushrooms. As it grew, wings came out, and it took to the sky. During its travels, it ruined the land below. Before long, other creatures began to worship and follow the winged beast. It battled stronger and stronger monsters until, at last, the serpent became a wyvern and destroyed everything in its path, even its own followers. After all that ruin, it stood alone on top of a mountain, still roaring at the sky as time kept passing. Then, countless years later, it rose into the clouds, not as a wyvern anymore, but as a dragon. Cecil points out that it even wiped out its own followers. The system tells Jake he has witnessed the will of a true dragon. Cecil asks if he understands any of it, but he admits he doesn't. He just knows he'd love to fight that dragon someday. The two keep moving through more corridors, and Jake figures this dungeon still isn't over. Cecil bumps into his arm, muttering that without the mushrooms it's way too dark and asking how the protagonist can even see. That's thanks to MC's high perception, though he thinks his bloodline skill helps even more here. Usually his perception sphere grows when he's in danger, but now it feels more like a thin beam, almost like a passive skill. Jake wonders if Cecil knows more, since he's much older, but instead just asks if the imp wants to return to the necklace until they find light again. Cecil refuses. He asks if the inside of the necklace is really that bad. Cecil says the place itself is fine, and he can even see outside through the opening. The problem is, once you're inside, you can only come out if someone lets you. In the end, Cecil says he doesn't want to be left alone for another 1,000 years. Jake remembers that he was trapped there, and promises he'd never do that to him. Cecil says everyone claims that, but right then they finally find a light source. Jake can tell it doesn't look like mushroom light, and when they reach it, he wonders what this place even is. Cecil says it looks like a library. The protagonist walks through the room and confirms it. The books are ancient. He tries to grab one, but a blue light stops him. Jake realizes he can't touch anything. Cecil finds a bench with writing tools, but MC can't touch those either, so it's a barrier, but no challenge has appeared yet. Then Cecil spots a door and calls Jake over. He sees they just need to keep going. The two move on, but the next hallway is lined with more doors, and Cecil says the dungeon is getting repetitive. One room is a bedroom, another is a bathroom. Behind one door, they find a huge garden. Farther in, there's something like a lab, or maybe a torture room. Cecil guesses they're inside some old mansion. At last, they reach the final door in the hallway and start opening it. This one really does seem to be the challenge room, because another pedestal stands in the center. This time there's no dagger, just a handprint pressed into it. Jake figures he has to touch it, but Cecil, remembering the dagger, says that's a terrible idea. The protagonist asks where his sense of adventure went, then reaches his hand toward the pedestal. The second he touches it, Jake feels a small spike shoot out from underneath and pierce his hand. Cecil panics as MC pulls his hand back. He says the spike came out insanely fast. His hand is bleeding badly and looks awful. Then Cecil notices a new pedestal rising up. On top of it sits a book, and on the cover is the same snake from earlier. Jake says it must be tied to the challenge. Then the system appears and says his trial is to become an alchemist of the malevolent viper and cure himself of the poison within 30 days. If he fails, the poison will twist his body and kill him. The protagonist looks down at his hand and understands. The system adds that if he refuses the challenge, he'll be cured, but lose everything he earned in the dungeon. Jake quickly explains both choices to Cecil. The imp asks what he's going to do. Looking at the system screen, MC says there's only one answer. He didn't enter this dungeon to run from a challenge. Back in the Great Forest, someone watches 4 deer. It's Adam, thinking that he and William came in from the east. Then the signal is given, and both of them move in. The deer notice the humans coming. Adam knows Bertram is driving them from the south, forcing the animals west, straight into the trap they prepared the night before. At that moment, Adam calls for Casper. The boy yanks the rope with all his strength, and the trap catches 3 deer, while one manages to break free of the net. Adam and Casper move toward the trapped animals. William charges after the one that escaped. He throws 3 daggers, and 2 hit the deer cleanly. It drops dead in the forest. William cheers over the direct hit, but Casper seems to have gotten hurt too. William apologizes for his awful aim, but Casper says it's only a light wound. The young wizard says this should feed them for a week. Adam tells everyone they did well, then asks Lyra to help finish off the trapped deer. An hour later, they carry the catch back, and Casper apologizes for not getting all of them. Adam tells him not to worry. This was more than enough for one hunt. Lyra asks if Casper is okay. He says he's fine, and thinks they should take the meat to the butcher. When they reach camp, Lyra says she'll meet him soon. Seeing them talk, Adam jokes that things are moving pretty fast between those two. Casper jumps and asks if it's too fast, worried Lyra might think he's gross. Adam tells him to calm down. At the end of the world, people don't waste much time. Casper asks if that's why Adam sneaks into Caroline's cabin every night, which leaves Adam completely red-faced. Casper quickly adds that he won't tell anyone, though he figures everyone already knows. After that, Adam heads to the blacksmith's cabin. The man asks if Adam's sword needs fixing, but Adam actually came for Caroline, since Casper got hurt during the hunt and needs healing. Caroline apologizes because she still has to finish Richard's armor. Adam asks if Richard has her busy again. She says Richard always finds ways to keep her with the main team. A little later, Adam mentions that Casper saw him visiting her at night. He says the kid is so sneaky he might even be stealthier than Jake. Caroline tells Adam he always circles back to him, but he needs to move on. Adam says he's just worried. Since they got separated, he hasn't heard anything about his ex-Archer. Caroline reminds him the protagonist is grown and can handle himself. Adam wonders what Jake is doing right now, and Caroline guesses it's probably something dumb and dangerous. Meanwhile, in the dungeon, MC tells Cecil he's sick of eating mushrooms. Cecil fires back that if he stopped eating them, they wouldn't have to keep hunting for more. Still, the protagonist points out he unlocked a skill that lets him learn about poisons by eating them, and it's not like there's chicken down there anyway. Cecil says he's perfectly fine living on moss and water, and suggests Jake try that instead. MC goes back to the giant library. He asks for a mana potion, since he needs to recover before getting ready. Cecil asks why he can't just rest after working for hours already. Right then, Jake gets hit with a sharp pain. He says he has to learn alchemy fast, so he can brew a healing potion. He grinds the ingredients into a paste, then pours mana into the mix. Next comes the transmutation for the right attribute, and if it works, the paste should turn red. Instead, it comes out brown. Jake says that's another failed batch. Cecil tells him to slow down. It's only been a week, and he still has time. He says he barely knows how to make potions yet, and asks for another so he can keep trying. Cecil tells him to wait, because forcing it will just waste supplies. Jake feels that sharp pain again. Cecil rushes over and asks if he's okay. Then he realizes the poison is spreading because almost half of the protagonist's body is covered now. Back at camp, Adam arrives and asks if someone sent for him. Richard thanks him for coming so fast. He explains that one hunting group came back empty-handed, so they're low on meat. Richard wants Adam and a few others to hunt deeper in the forest. Adam asks if that means outside their usual area, and Richard says yes. It's riskier, but it could pay off. Adam thanks him, though he still seems unsure. Richard says not to worry. It's no suicide mission, because he'd never send his men to their deaths. Adam says he wants Caroline along, since having a healer would help. Richard says that won't work, because he keeps the teams strictly separated. Adam accepts that and says he'll gather his group soon. Before he leaves, Richard asks one favor. Leave Casper at camp. Adam asks why. Richard says they found a broken fence and fear another survivor group may be scouting the area. Since Casper is good with traps, he wants him reinforcing it. Adam says he'll talk to the boy later. Bertram rounds up some animals and asks how many badgers should still be left. Lyra says there should be 8 total. Adam comments that the beasts out here are much tougher because there are so many more of them. William says at least they earned a lot of tutorial points from it. Adam notices William is covered in blood and tells him to wash up while they handle the animals. William agrees. On the way to the river, he thinks Adam and Richard are already getting on his nerves. He keeps brooding that they act like NPCs, but it doesn't matter. He plans to leave their camp soon. Then he hears something, and William hides at once, knowing someone is close. A man whispers for everyone to stay quiet, since they don't know who might be nearby. A woman tells him to relax because they'll be quick. Then a wizard shows up, saying he only needs to wash his wand. Still hidden, William notices there's no healer with them, and starts wondering how many tutorial points that group is worth. Then a sound comes from the bushes. The leader immediately calls out, asking who's there. William tells himself to stay calm since this trick has worked before. The woman aims an arrow at him and orders him to come out slowly or she'll shoot. William steps out, pretending he got separated from his team after an attack. The archer asks if that story is supposed to be true. William smugly thinks girls usually fall for this act. Instead, an arrow slams down right beside his head, leaving him stunned. The archer tells him nobody there is that dumb. The knight orders William to drop his gear and back away slowly. William acts like he'll cooperate. The archer tells him to hurry while keeping her bow trained on him. Kneeling down with a smile, the boy reaches for his wand instead. The archer catches it and fires another arrow at once. William throws himself aside and avoids it. With the wand in hand, he gets his daggers ready. The knight blocks some of them with his shield and yells for the others to rush him. 2 more arrows come flying, and William dodges those too. The enemy wizard wonders what kind of magic he's using. William realizes they're stronger than he expected. The archer keeps him lined up, but he decides they still aren't strong enough. One of his daggers punches through and kills the woman. She collapses, writhing from the hit. The knight panics and runs to her, but 2 more daggers fly out and take the heads off both the knight and the young wizard. Later, William checks his system while sitting among the corpses. He sees one was level 10 and the other 2 were level 9, so the fight wasn't a waste of time. Then, someone calls William's name from the forest. He realizes he might be in trouble. It's Lyra, asking if he's ready yet. William panics because he's still surrounded by bodies. Lyra stares in shock and asks what happened there. William just tells her to mind her own business. 5 minutes later, he returns to the group. Adam says they sent Lyra to look for him. William answers that he never saw her and guesses she must have gotten lost. Back in the library, Cecil returns with more mushrooms for Jake, but the human isn't there. A moment later, he finds MC collapsed on the floor. Cecil shouts for his friend and tries hard to wake him, but it looks like the poison drained all his strength. Then Cecil notices Jake managed to make healing potions after all. He quickly gives him one and keeps trying to wake him up. He finally opens his eyes and asks what's going on. Cecil says he's not sure, he just found him passed out. Jake says he's only exhausted. Seeing hundreds of potions around, Cecil asks how many he made that morning. The protagonist says he's finally getting good at alchemy and wants to try making poisons next. Cecil tells him to rest before doing anything else, but MC refuses because time is running out and he needs more practice now. Cecil says there are still 2 weeks left, but if Jake keeps this up, he may not live that long. He says that sounds just like his old coworkers. They always chose the easy way because they were too scared to push themselves. Cecil asks him again to take it easy, and the protagonist snaps back that it's a coward's way of thinking. That does it. Cecil knocks over his alchemy pot, spilling the potion across the floor. Jake says he didn't mean to insult him. Cecil glares at the human and says he is not a coward. MC finally apologizes, and Cecil storms off, saying fine, but he can gather his own mushrooms next time. The next day, Cecil still doesn't come back to the library, and Jake starts wondering if he should go apologize. Then he pushes the thought aside because he has to keep working. By then, he finishes the beginner book on offensive alchemy and learns the recipe for a necrotic potion. The protagonist realizes poison making is a lot like making cures. The main difference is crushing the vitality of the ingredients and boosting the harmful traits that cause damage. Right after that, the system tells him he successfully made a common necrotic potion. Jake lights up and calls for Cecil so they can celebrate, but the library stays completely quiet. He calls for his imp friend again, the one who vanished a day ago, but the silence doesn't break. Then Cecil finally appears and asks what Jake wanted. Excited, MC says he made poison on his very first try. Cecil grumbles and sarcastically asks if he wants a cookie. That's when he realizes his friend is still upset about their fight. Then the system announces his malevolent Viper alchemist profession leveled up to 24, with 2 free points left. A full status screen appears, and the protagonist decides to put more points into wisdom. He notes that alchemy is finally starting to pay off. Another screen pops up, saying his profession can evolve because all the requirements have been met. Jake has no idea what that means, but Cecil says it sounds interesting. Now the system says his talent for alchemy is unmatched, and asks if he wants to evolve. MC wonders if this could make him an even stronger alchemist, then accepts. Even Cecil has no answer. A warning pops up. If he puts off the evolution, bad things could happen, and he won't gain any new points. That's when Jake understands he never really had a choice. Once he accepts, he wonders what's about to happen. Then the entire place starts shaking without stopping. Something big is clearly happening. Cecil quickly asks if the protagonist caused this to start so fast. A green mist wraps around the dew, and the whole space starts to change. A moment later, they hit the ground somewhere completely new. Staring at what looks like another dimension, Jake asks what this place is. Even so, he doesn't sense any danger around him. As he moves forward, he suddenly feels something coming and spins around. A pale figure walks toward him. The scaled young man wonders why the dew is here. Jake finds it odd. His bloodline never reacted, and he felt no hostility. Still, he knows this being is dangerous, so the creature asks if the dew didn't hear him. Then he asks again why the two of them are there. MC forces himself to settle down, since he doesn't seem to be in danger. He explains that he was becoming an alchemist, and then suddenly ended up here. The mysterious being seems to understand right away. He then says it's a pleasure to meet Jake. After all, this was the malevolent viper he had been talking about. Then, the being bluntly tells everyone else to go to hell. The protagonist points out that he doesn't look like some snake dragon. The viper responds to that. Soon his arms and legs shift, turning scaly. A pair of wings comes out just as easily. Now a grand dragon stands before Jake, and the viper asks if this form is better. Cecil says he can't believe he's really standing before him. He adds that this is one of the loyal servants of the viper. Since the little creature called himself his servant, she must have come before the order itself. Still, the young man makes it clear he isn't a servant. He only came to explore the dungeon. The viper is impressed he went through all that. After all, he built those traps long ago. Hearing that, the young man realizes he's talking to the dungeon's designer. Curious, he asks what the viper thought about the part where people had to feed him things, or the section where they had to learn his history just to get a mural of him doing cool stuff. It sounds pretty narcissistic, but the designer takes it as high praise. Jake keeps going and asks if he's some kind of god, and yes he is. He says if MC keeps leveling up, he'll eventually get a dimension of his own. In the end it's kind of boring, but immortality is pretty nice. He likes the idea of his own dimension, but he rejects immortality. Life matters because it ends. To the designer, that way of thinking makes no sense. Even so, he says he likes Jake's answer. Cecil drops to the ground and apologizes to the viper for the protagonist's behavior. He can't understand how MC dares speak to a god like this when just being there terrifies him. He can't really explain it either. Maybe it's his strong will, but the viper says that's not how it works. Stats can change some things, but not the mind. Willpower helps someone endure immortality and the time that comes with it, but only if they already had that strength to begin with. Plenty of beings with unbelievable power still fell to their own minds. Some never handled it, and time doesn't heal everything. Jake hears a lot of sadness in the viper's voice. He seems genuinely down. The viper tells him the path to power is painfully lonely. Family, friends, everything that matters gets left behind in the end. Jake steps closer, feeling for him and realizing the viper must have made hard choices. He puts a hand on his shoulder and says hiding in this dimension won't fix anything. Cecil is horrified by how casually the protagonist touches a god. The viper shakes his head and says MC doesn't understand the situation. He answers that he ran because his plan wasn't working, and now it's time to try something else. At this point, Cecil is sure they're about to die horribly. After hearing that, the viper stares at Jake. The protagonist waits for the answer, nervous but steady. Instead, the viper jokes that the young man is way too emotional. That actually makes him like MC more. Cecil, curious, asks what the viper thinks of him, but the designer barely even noticed he was there. They talk for hours, and the viper learns Jake's story, especially the part about Caroline. Cecil, who heard it too, says she must be a female architect. The other two just stare at him, like he completely missed the point. Then they both burst out laughing, which leaves Cecil annoyed. Still teasing him, the viper says diabetes must know a lot about women. Jake then realizes he must have missed a notification. One of his lineage skills had improved, and the viper asks what changed. It seems his perception has doubled. That catches the viper's interest, and he says his lineage is very unusual. The protagonist quickly asks if he knows anything about it, and whether he can teach him more. The viper says the system doesn't like secrets being shared. That rule has existed ever since a minor god destroyed a universe, and insists it wasn't him. Jake sighs, disappointed, but this is pretty much what he expected. They had a great time, but the viper says it's time for them to keep moving. Meeting MC gave him a lot to think about, and he praises him, since people with that much ambition are rare. Excited, he asks if that means he passed the job interview and is now a real alchemist of the malevolent viper. The god says yes. Then he puts a hand on Jake's shoulder and says he has something to help on his journey. A thin thread of karma appears, and the protagonist's body starts to glow. The viper thanks them for the company, and MC says goodbye, saying it was fun. With a wave, he says he hopes they meet again soon. The god knows his bloodline is extremely powerful, so he decides to watch him from now on. Now he has other matters to handle. He admits he stayed idle too long. It's time for the malevolent Viper to return. That man says it hasn't been long since they sent Lyra to look for William. He's surprised by that, since he never saw her anywhere. He just hopes she didn't get lost on the way. When they reach the camp, they're welcomed back. The young man greeting them asks what they think of the new fence. Instead of answering, they walk toward Casper with sad looks. He immediately realizes Lyra isn't with them. All they can do is apologize. They explain that they don't know what really happened, only that she got lost in the forest. That answer deeply irritates Casper. They searched for hours and found no sign of her at all. Since nobody knew what to think about what might have happened, Casper couldn't hide his anger. This had to be some kind of joke. The young man shakes his head. It isn't a joke. Lyra is gone, and there was nothing they could do. Hearing that, he finally lets himself grieve. A week later, someone gives a report about William. During the night, he attacked another group of survivors. The chief guesses it was Hayden's group. His servant confirms it, and Hayden's son died in the fight. That makes the situation even worse. And William didn't stop there. He also left a mark on the boy's head. Along with it came a message. Richard says hello. Now retaliation is only a matter of time. They also found arrows around the camp, and the way they were made showed they weren't theirs. It was obvious Hayden was hunting whoever did that to his son's body. Killing was one thing, but this crossed the line. Protecting William was starting to look like more trouble than it was worth. The servant waits for the order. Once he gets it, he'll handle everything. He already has 2 men watching William right now, but the chief tells him to stay hidden. He's seen this kind of thing before. The boy is talented, even if he's arrogant, and if they can control him, he could be useful. The servant accepts that without argument. When they go to William, they ask if he's made progress on the stone-tipped arrows. The boy says he's finally finished them all. It took longer than expected, because he's still adjusting to his new profession. The woman notices his body is covered in grease. That maker pulls him into a hug and tries to wipe some of it off. William says it's fine to get a little dirty while working. The man nearby says that's the mark of someone who works hard. The woman says tailoring would have been better for him. Even leather work would be easier than this. But William enjoys blacksmithing, and Smith has been teaching him everything he needs. Seeing that he likes it, she just tells him to be careful. With a smile, he promises he will. As he watches them leave, he thinks this is getting really annoying. It feels like Caroline thinks she can tell him what he should and shouldn't do. He's sure if she weren't so beautiful, nobody would put up with her constant comments. Either way, a war between Richard and Hayden is about to start, and once he's killed enough people and earned his bonus, he'll be able to leave this place. Lost in thought, William hears Smith ask him to help move some boxes. He heads over right away, eager to help him. Elsewhere, the finished arrows are being delivered. He doesn't understand why Casper didn't come get them himself. It would have been a good chance to step outside the tent and clear his head. Casper admits he doesn't want to see that person. The man delivering the arrows assumes he means Smith. Only then does Casper clarify. It's William he doesn't want to see. The man knew Casper still thought William was hiding the truth about Lyra's disappearance, and he refused to believe the boy was innocent. To him, William was clearly covering something up. On top of that, Jake would never trust William. After that short outburst, the tent went quiet. Worried, the man asked when Casper had last slept. Casper snapped back, telling him to stop bothering him. He said he was fine, and if the man wasn't going to help, he should just leave. The man answered that some suspicion was normal, and he never said Casper was wrong. After a long sigh, he kept going. He brought up the way Casper had been acting around camp. Anyone could see he looked at William like prey. His attitude was starting to scare everyone else. They felt like he might lose control at any second, and honestly, they weren't wrong. That's why the man asked what Casper planned to do with all those traps, because they sure didn't seem meant for deer. Casper replied that deep in the forest, there were far worse things than deer, and someone needed to start hunting them. Jake kept doing push-ups without stopping. Cecil cut in and asked if he was ready. Even then, the protagonist didn't stop training. Once he saw he was being ignored, Cecil asked how long he'd been at it. Jake finally finished and said it had only been 30 minutes. After checking his status, he wished he'd improved more, but for 1 month of training, it wasn't bad. Cecil warned him not to wear himself out. They still had a long day ahead. MC could barely hide how excited he was to finally get out of that cave. Seeing that, Cecil reminded him he still had to make an antidote. The poison was spreading fast through his body, and it could kill him. He had about a day left to fix it. Still, Jake was sure he'd pull it off. Back at camp, William kept busy with small jobs. Caroline stopped him and said Richard's armor still wasn't done yet, but that wasn't why she came. She had a warning. From now on, he wasn't to go near Hayden's camp. Playing innocent, William asked if something was wrong. Things were getting tense, so Richard said he could still hunt, just not near the other camp. William promised he'd be careful. Caroline felt relieved that he'd listened. She tried warning Casper too, but he still wouldn't listen. William couldn't see why Casper would go near enemy territory. Maybe he was setting traps. Lately, Casper had been lost in his own head. That made William wonder how many tutorial points Casper had by now. After they finished talking, William promised she could trust him and swore he'd stay away from the enemy camp. Returning to the chief's room, Caroline was asked how it went. She said her part was done, and now she was sure William would follow Casper. Richard thought it was a great plan. He didn't like doing things this way, but those two had become a problem for the camp. William wasn't nearly as clever as he thought, and Casper looked ready to burn the whole camp down. Caroline argued that Casper was just grieving. Richard disagreed and pointed out that after Lyra vanished, Casper disappeared for days too. He'd gone into the forest looking for her. Casper had shouted her name over and over, desperate for any clue. Then, by the river, he found a body near some creatures. It was Lyra. He drove the creatures off and ran to her. Dropping to his knees beside her, he broke down. In grief, he demanded to know who had done this. He couldn't accept what he was seeing. Then, he looked at her stomach and noticed the wounds. Something about them stood out. They were clearly made by a dagger. He wondered who had thrown it at her. Still lost in shock, he suddenly heard someone call his name. Casper asked who was there. Again, the voice called to him. It asked if he wanted to bring Lyra back, and in desperation, he said yes. The voice told him to follow it, and it led him to a hidden dungeon. A few days went by after that. When Casper came back to camp, he was completely different. Everyone noticed the change. Richard knew something out there had changed him, and now he couldn't trust him. Caroline cried over it because Casper used to be her friend. The tutorial was cruel, but it would end soon. Once they got back to Earth, they could finally rest and rebuild their lives. She tried to stay hopeful. Maybe Casper could kill William and become himself again. Adam would be so happy to have his friend back. That was what they all wanted, and they kept supporting each other for it. So in the end, she and Adam could finally get the happy ending they'd always wanted. Wiping her tears, Caroline wished they could leave this cursed place as soon as possible. Richard could only smile at how foolish love made people. Meanwhile, Casper waited in the forest, sitting still as if meditating. Then he heard movement in the bushes. Just as he expected, the person he'd been waiting for had come. William approached with a friendly greeting and politely introduced himself, but his words were fake. He made it clear he already knew Casper had been waiting for him. Casper answered that he'd come at the perfect time. They traded a quick look, both understanding what came next. A fight between them was unavoidable. Caroline had warned William to stay away, but with how much they hated each other, a clash was bound to happen. Acting smug, William claimed he had no idea why. That only made Casper angrier. He was sure William had done this to Lyra. William said that even if he had, it didn't matter. Casper was weaker than him and hadn't even been earning tutorial points. Hearing that only pushed Casper further. He thought back to the day he first met Lyra. He'd been really shy. Lyra said she liked his name because it reminded her of a movie. Casper thought his own name sounded dumb, but Lyra strongly disagreed and called it cute. That was how she first won his heart. A week later, they'd already grown much closer. That's when Lyra asked if he'd want to go out with her sometime. He was completely caught off guard. She quickly apologized, saying she just found him interesting and didn't want to sound stupid. To her surprise, Casper said he'd like that too, but he worried she'd misunderstood and thought he was calling her stupid. Before he could explain, she kissed him on the cheek. Casper was shattered. He had lost the person he loved, and William mocked him, saying his emotions had ruined his judgment. That made Casper even angrier. Losing Lyra meant losing his whole world, and now he wanted revenge on the one who took it from him. William said fighting him wouldn't bring her back. Casper didn't care. William understood nothing. Love was too complicated for an idiot like him. William felt the jab and realized Casper was getting under his skin. Casper knew he looked down on other people's feelings, and that was his biggest weakness. William said his patience was running out. If Casper wouldn't listen, then he'd have to deal with him. But that threat only worked on someone afraid to die. Since Casper wasn't, William decided to kill him. He hurled several daggers at once. Casper knocked them away with his spear. William hadn't expected him to be that fast. Before he could recover, Casper was already countering. Now he threw a dagger back. It missed William's face completely. William grinned and said it wasn't even close to dangerous, until Casper revealed that he was never aiming for him. The dagger cut a hidden rope. That was why Casper had made so many arrows. William was glad he still had some metal on him. While William was distracted defending himself, Casper went in for a killing blow, but not one of his hits landed. Still, he forced William backward and right into a big trap. William had to use magic to free his foot. In that brief opening, Casper's spear shot toward him. William still managed to dodge, though the tip grazed his face. He needed to make some distance. Casper was already breathing hard after all those attacks. William dropped the act and admitted the setup wasn't bad, but now it was time to get serious. Using magic, he fired out even more daggers, so Casper wasn't the only one who had prepared for this fight. William was sure there was no way Casper could block all of them, but Casper just smiled. He said he'd met a man in a dungeon. At the lowest point of his grief, that man had offered him a deal. Casper opened his arms and waited for the daggers. They dropped to the ground, and William was stunned. The deal gave Casper immense power, and that power grew from his emotions. Energy wrapped around his arms, the hatred of the dead made real. William couldn't believe what he was seeing. Backing away in fear, he tripped over a rock. Showing real panic, he begged Casper to spare him and promised to leave the camp. But Casper said he didn't plan to kill him, he only needed a witness. That was all William was meant to be. The power started sinking into Casper's body. He apologized for the pointless fight, and said that after what William did to Lyra, he needed to land one last blow before leaving. William had no idea what he meant. Casper said goodbye, and hoped they'd never meet again. A huge sphere of black energy swelled around him. Then it vanished, leaving William alone in the clearing. A few moments later, somewhere else, a ritual began. Casper appeared inside the magic circle, and said everything was done. The strange voice praised him. Even if the ritual was hard to understand, his master was happy with the result. Then a skeletal hand appeared and told the boy to rise. It was time for him to receive his afterlife. William still couldn't process it. In his mind, Casper had just taken his own life. Even so, the spell Casper used was amazing. Power born from pure emotion. William didn't even want to think about what that really meant. Still, he knew he wanted that power for himself. Meanwhile, Jake's time to cure the poison was running out, and he kept meditating. Cecil could tell things were getting worse. Watching his friend like this was almost too much. He had to be in terrible pain. Cecil wasn't even sure he could handle that kind of fear himself. Without opening his eyes, Jake told the creature to stop staring. That shocked Cecil. He had no clue how the protagonist noticed. MC explained that his bloodline still worked with his eyes closed, so he could sense everything. Cecil admitted he was worried, and seemed to be the only one thinking about the time left. He asked how long he planned to stay still, and he said until he was ready. Cecil warned that he should be practicing already. Less than an hour remained. The protagonist compared it to students back in college freaking out before a huge test. He had learned early that the best move in moments like that was to stay calm. It was like getting ready to fire an arrow. First, take a deep breath, then ready your whole body. After that, let every distraction fade. Wait until the perfect moment comes. Only then should the arrow be loosed. Cecil asked if he had tried praying, though he already knew Jake wasn't really into that. Then again, he figured it might be worth joking about, since they had literally met a god last week. MC said he still didn't see it that way, even after getting a blessing from that being. Cecil got curious about it, since that huge stat boost had clearly helped during some alchemy work. Jake figured that if he prayed to the Viper, he'd probably just get ignored. That seemed useless. Even so, he started praying, warning the Viper that if he died, he'd haunt him even in the afterlife. That prayer scared Cecil half to death. He got so fired up he started hitting himself, saying the Viper might as well kill them now. Then he flashed a huge grin and said the Viper liked that. He could almost feel the god cheering him on. Right after that, his body began to shake. Soon he started coughing too, which made Cecil even more nervous. Maybe Jake had it wrong, and that wasn't a sign from the Viper at all. When the protagonist looked at the foul stuff in his hand from the cough, he knew things were going bad. He got to his feet and told Cecil not to worry. His story wasn't ending here. Not after all he'd survived. Jake had fought all kinds of enemies. His body had been pushed past its limits again and again. He had even lost friends along the way. If he fell here, then everything he'd gone through would mean nothing. He told Cecil to stay focused. They still had a lot to do. Then MC began laying out his tools and ingredients. He needed juice from the rare mushrooms that had to be mixed with blood and old moss. It would take time, so he couldn't let his focus slip. Cecil brought over the rest of what was needed for the antidote, and the clock kept ticking. As he worked, Jake adjusted his stance to save energy. If the potion bubbled, that meant things were on track. Now he had to pour his own mana into it slowly and evenly. He kept that up until the next phase began. Then the system told him he had successfully made an antidote. Cecil asked if it would work, but Jake couldn't say for sure. The potion was highly unstable. In just a few minutes it would break down. He didn't know if it would help, and he only had a tiny window to find out. Worse, the challenge timer was almost over. With no other option left, he got ready to drink it. Jake downed the whole bowl in one gulp. It was rougher than he expected. When he finished, Cecil asked how he felt. He said nothing had changed. Then the challenge time finally expired. A wave of pain spread through his whole body. Cecil panicked at what he was seeing. Jake felt the agony racing through him. The poison was getting even stronger. He could barely breathe. With dread, he realized the poison was moving through his body, and his strength was draining away. As it got worse, he coughed up something that looked like tomato juice. If the poison reached his heart, he was done. There would be no way to fix it. Cecil ran to the cabinet for health potions. Jake replayed every step in his head. He had done everything right, so why had he still failed? It felt like the poison was eating his heart alive. Unable to stay up any longer, he dropped to the floor and blacked out. His sight blurred, while Cecil begged him to hold on. As time passed and his heart weakened, Jake saw Adam in a dream. Adam asked if he was really going to quit like this. Even with no strength left, the protagonist answered that he wasn't giving up. That was never his choice. Forcing himself up, he swore he'd fight the poison, and he would be the one who won. MC rose to his feet full of confidence. His heart was beating with new life. Cecil rushed over in a panic, arms full of health potions. Jake was awake again, even though the pain was still intense. Cecil couldn't make sense of it either. Breathing hard, he guessed the antidote was finally working. When the marks on his body started fading too, he knew he had passed the test. He was still hurting, but he was alive. Once he was fully healed, the two of them celebrated. The Viper had watched it all. The antidote wasn't perfect, but Jake survived because of his willpower and toughness. What saved him in the end was his refusal to give up. It seemed trusting this boy had been the right call. The system congratulated him on clearing the challenge, and said the dungeon would shut down in a few hours. That was all the time they had to pack up. Jake said he didn't have much to grab, but Cecil reminded him that he did. The protagonist had already assumed they would leave together. Cecil hadn't really thought about that, and asked if MC truly wanted them to stick together. He said he wasn't about to leave him behind in that broken dungeon. Cecil was still trying to process those words, but they had gone through a lot together, and because of that, they had become companions. That hit Cecil hard. Jake burst out laughing when he saw the little demon crying. A moment later, a stream of system alerts interrupted them. Messages kept pouring in. They were his rewards. There were so many that he could barely follow them. 4 points to every stat, plus 4 more in vitality, new boots, and extra storage space. Cecil asked how he felt, and Jake said he felt insanely strong. It was also a relief to have his weapons back after a month without a real fight. Cecil guessed he might be rusty. That could be true, but the protagonist was more worried about his level. His alchemy had grown a lot, yet he was still only a level 9 archer. Since he didn't know the average level in the forest, he assumed he still had plenty of catching up to do. Cecil admitted he didn't know how much help he could be since he had no level or stats. Jake said that if things got too dangerous, he could always put Cecil back in the necklace, but the creature refused. He had already spent 1,000 years in there, and wasn't going back. After a long walk, they finally reached the dungeon exit. MC asked if he was ready to breathe fresh air again. At last, the two stepped outside. It was a whole lot better than being trapped in that dark dungeon. Then Jake looked to the side and spotted a dinosaur. It didn't take long before more trouble showed up. A little time to enjoy the moment would have been nice, but he thought the timing was perfect. This was a great chance to test his skills. The dinosaurs were between level 17 and 24. 4 of them had him surrounded, all stronger than him, but the danger he sensed was only moderate. He believed he could handle it. The beasts charged, ready to eat him alive. Jake's plan was simple: split them up and keep the fight at range. Moving around them, he fired a burst of deadly arrows. The first 2 dropped almost right away. They hit the ground and didn't move again. Cecil warned him that the others were coming from behind. One had closed the gap way too fast. Jake barely dodged and immediately noticed how quick it was. That made him wonder if all that time without fighting had slowed him down. Cecil was freaking out. He was almost watching the protagonist become dinner. Then, out of nowhere, the dinosaur stopped its attack. Jake used that opening to draw his sword. The hungry creature turned its attention fully toward him. He hadn't even finished pulling the blade free before he had to dodge again at the very last second. At that close range, he managed to slash it. That one hit was enough to kill it. The dinosaur dropped, still twitching in pain. Only one enemy was left. That's when his perception picked up something else. More dinosaurs had been watching from farther away, and now they finally stepped in. Maybe this was the perfect chance to see how much stronger he had become. Jake was determined. He would not lose. The dinosaurs rushed him at incredible speed, but MC's resolve was stronger. He wanted to prove himself against anything that came at him. Faster than the dinosaurs, Jake dropped 3 before they could react. He was set on fighting until he stood at the top. Then another one lunged at him from behind. It didn't matter. He had survived the dungeon, so this thing wasn't a real threat. He kept cutting them down without slowing. Those beasts weren't going to stop him. Now the last dinosaurs started to hesitate. When they stopped pushing forward, the protagonist rushed them like a starving hunter. He raised his sword and got ready to finish it. Caught up in the fight, he roared. Cecil scrambled onto a boulder, trying not to end up in a dinosaur's mouth. Just then, arrows sliced through the air. The dinosaur turned, and one shot punched through its neck. It crashed down and couldn't get back up. The fight was over almost as soon as it started, and every creature was dead. With the danger gone, Cecil admitted staying in the dungeon might have been the better choice. Jake agreed it was rougher than he expected, but figured things would get easier once he got back into the swing of fighting. Cecil knew he wasn't built for combat, and he had no interest in becoming dinosaur food. Then, something unexpected happened. MC got a huge pile of tutorial points. After that battle, his archer class hit level 13, and he gained 4 stat points. Seeing how much he progressed, Jake guessed he got bonus experience for beating enemies far above his level. Cecil said at this rate, he'd pass everyone soon. He also unlocked a new skill, Power Shot, which boosts an arrow based on how long he draws the bow. The longer he holds the string, the harder the arrow hits, perfect for surprise attacks. It matched his alchemy well too, since he could coat arrows with poison. A strong arrow mixed with poison sounded deadly. Then his perception caught him off guard again. Cecil noticed him lose focus, but he stayed sharp. He had sensed something. He didn't know what it was, only that it was far away and insanely powerful. Cecil quickly said they should stay as far from it as possible. The protagonist didn't agree. However strong it was, he still wanted to face it. Back at Richard's camp, Caroline kept brushing her hair. Adam came in and asked if there was any word about Casper. Caroline told him no, but Richard planned to send scouts out the next day. Adam couldn't hide how upset he was. She moved closer and tried to comfort him, saying things would be okay, but he was still worried about his friend. Everyone knew Casper had gone after William, and now both of them were gone. Adam asked if William had said anything to Caroline before vanishing. She lied, said no, and promised to tell him if she learned anything. Then she pulled him into a warm hug and said she meant it. Even so, the worry on her face was starting to show. Somewhere that looked like a therapist's office, a voice asked William why he was there. He had been ordered by the court to start therapy. The therapist asked if he understood why he had been sentenced. William showed little empathy and had a violent streak. The therapist asked if there was anything more. William went quiet, full of fear. It had been 1 year since he killed his own little brother. A year earlier, his father asked if he was ready to meet the new baby. Barely looking up from his phone, William said he guessed so. His father told him to sound more excited. His mother had been in labor a long time, and she could use some cheering up. Then a doctor came over and asked to speak with William's father for a moment. There had been problems during the birth. The mother was safe, but the baby needed observation. William's eyes turned cold. To him, the baby was already causing trouble on day 1. He stared at the newborn and thought it looked weak and pathetic. Time passed, and the baby got a little older. One day his mother asked William to get the newspaper. He went outside to collect the mail and deliveries. As he sorted through them, one item caught his eye. It was an envelope he couldn't ignore. A university he had wanted had sent him a letter. He ran back inside, excited, and told his parents he got accepted, but they didn't even understand why he was so thrilled. His excitement meant nothing to them at first, so William explained which school accepted him. He had picked it for its academic focus and never thought he'd actually make it in. His parents asked how much the tuition would cost. He didn't know the exact number. They said it was amazing news, but they simply couldn't afford that school right now. William tried to stress that it was one of the best universities in the world. They said they were proud of him, but with the baby, that kind of cost was impossible. That answer crushed him. Later, he went to the baby's crib. The child seemed to have ongoing health issues. William didn't even see that tiny body as a real person. A baby who couldn't even breathe alone had somehow become more important than him. To William, the child was only a burden on his parents, and in his mind it was time for that burden to help everyone out. He decided the baby should disappear forever and shut off the machine helping it breathe. Right away, the infant started gasping. It couldn't get air. Soon the baby blacked out completely. His parents rushed in, horrified by what William had done. His mother shoved him aside to reach the baby. William really thought he had solved their money problem. His parents panicked. The baby had stopped breathing. William still believed it was all useless anyway, that the child was ruining their lives. His father grabbed him in fury, unable to understand why he'd do something so horrible. William repeated that he only did it to help the family. A year later, he was in prison. While meeting a staff member, he gave his name. They handed him the medicine he needed to stay sane. Taking it every day made his thoughts feel tangled and unclear. He had lost count of how long he'd been locked up. He didn't even understand why he was still there. William couldn't grasp why his parents had left him behind. Bit by bit, his mind broke further and sank into deeper madness. In that state, he got a system message telling him he had transmigrated. At first, he had no idea what that meant. Now he was in the middle of a forest, trying to make his way back to camp. He had fooled everyone. No one had seen his real nature. The only person who suspected him was gone, and William was set on learning what that power was. He wanted it for himself. First, he needed to recover. Casper hadn't meant to kill him, but the leftover energy from that sphere had almost finished the job. He was desperately thirsty, and if he didn't find water soon, he felt like he might collapse. Then he found a huge lake and thought his luck had turned. But he quickly realized someone else was there. He ducked behind a rock and watched to see who it was. When the person came closer, they seemed familiar. William was sure he knew him. A little earlier, Jake had been studying the blast marks and the energy left behind. It looked like a huge bomb had exploded there. Whoever caused it might still be close, and if MC moved fast, he could find them. Cecil wished him luck and said he was going back into the necklace. Jake could keep hunting monsters all he wanted, but Cecil wasn't about to die on his first day outside the cave. He said that was fair, but told him not to whine later when boredom hit. He touched the necklace and sent Cecil back inside. At last, Cecil was out of sight. Still, Cecil said he could hear what was happening outside even from in there. The protagonist smirked and said he knew already, but he was bluffing. Then he crouched by the water and drank. After that, he asked if Cecil could sense anyone from inside the necklace, because somebody was hiding behind a rock. He asked if the little demon could sense presences in there, since someone was definitely concealed nearby. Cecil said no. He could only see what was right in front of the necklace. He wondered if the hidden person caused the explosion, but Jake doubted it. Whoever it was had some strength, just nowhere near that much, so he acted like he noticed nothing. He didn't want anyone learning he had magical gear. When MC called out to ask if anyone was there, William assumed he'd been spotted. He stepped out and said it had been a while since he'd run into another person. He said he had just come out of a cave and was exploring the area. William figured Jake hadn't recognized him. Maybe Richard had drawn all the attention before. As they talked, the protagonist asked if there was a camp nearby. William said there were a few, and offered to guide him to his. Hearing there was more than one camp, MC wanted to know who led them. William said one camp belonged to Richard, the other to Hayden, and the two sides were currently at war. He was annoyed that people here had to deal with monsters and each other. William added that he knew the safe paths and could get him to Richard's camp without trouble. Jake accepted, thinking it would help him learn more about the camp and maybe find people he knew. So the two headed for Richard's camp. William was irritated because he still couldn't remember the boy's name. The protagonist had never introduced himself. Thanks to his perception, MC knew William was a level 24 summoned one. He didn't trust him, but he was sure he could react if William tried anything. For the moment, William was talking about Smith, the one who made weapons. Jake asked if someone named Adam was at the camp. Instead of answering, William suddenly tensed and said there was danger nearby, but with his sharpened senses, he could tell the area was safe. William claimed he had a skill that let him spot hidden mana, and said there was a trap ahead of them. Not sure what William was setting up, Jake chose to play it carefully. Noticing the protagonist used a bow, William suggested he sneak forward and check the area first. William would stay back and cover him if anything went wrong. The performance was terrible, and MC almost couldn't pretend to buy it. Still, he played along and said he'd trust William. William was now sure he was the one who had jumped Nicholas. Showing his true colors, he got ready to stab Jake in the back. Thanks to his skill, the protagonist felt the daggers coming. He snapped toward them and raised his bow, knocking every blade away like it was nothing. Only an idiot would fall for a trap that sloppy. William sneered that this tutorial was full of idiots, and Jake was next to die. But MC suddenly sprinted for the forest. William couldn't let him get too far, or his daggers would be useless, so he kept attacking, trying to box him in. After missing several throws, he realized Jake was far harder to hit than expected. Still, William believed the protagonist couldn't keep running forever. Then, an attack caught him by surprise, and tore deep across his stomach. He couldn't understand what had happened, or why MC had stopped fleeing. He knew William assumed he needed range, and could only fight as an archer. That was a huge mistake. William clung to one thought. The special dungeon dagger should make Jake bleed out. The protagonist decided to end things before that could matter. Despair hit William as he realized he might not survive. In panic, he broke his staff and used the move he'd been saving for Richard. It was the Shining Steel ability. This time, Jake was the one caught off guard. A bright, concentrated energy started building fast. A week earlier, William had gone to Richard because he was running low on mana potions and struggling to keep hunting. With the conflict against the other survivor group, there didn't seem to be an easy fix. William asked to take potions from Richard's personal stash. Richard shut that down and told him to get them from someone else. Then he brushed William off, saying he had more important things to handle. William acted crushed by the refusal, but it was completely fake. Later, while hunting, his anger kept building against Richard. He started thinking about stealing every potion in camp. He wanted all of them gone. He just needed more power and the right moment. After killing the creature, the system gave him something new. That ability burned with bright light and hit harder the more mana he poured into it. The destructive power of it fired William up. Now he used that new skill on Jake. A small metal-like sphere formed in front of him. MC instantly knew he had to get away. A moment later, the sphere blew up. A blinding flash came with it, forcing Jake to cover his eyes. He tried to pull back while his sight was still messed up. From the blast, metal shards flew everywhere. Several of them pierced his body. The explosion hit hard enough to throw him back. The wounds didn't look deep, but Jake had no clue what kind of attack had hit him. Even with his senses, he had barely managed to react. There was no time to dwell on it. William was still dangerous. Using that opening, William ran for his life. Jake knew he couldn't just let him get away after this, but his injuries might keep him from chasing properly. Then his necklace started glowing. Cecil asked if he was okay, and the protagonist said he'd blocked the worst of the attack where he could. Still, letting William go was smarter. MC wasn't fit to keep fighting, and he felt stupid for getting caught off guard. He already knew better than to underestimate anyone, yet he still got surprised. Cecil asked if William had caused the crater, but Jake couldn't say for sure. He'd spent so long in the cave that he had no idea how strong the other survivors had gotten. If William was just average here, he was in for a lot of trouble. Cecil suggested hiding in another dungeon, but the protagonist refused. It was time to get stronger and level up. Back at camp, the women were chatting. They said the gloves were made really well and built to handle pain. Since he'd been working so hard, she wanted to give him something he'd actually like. Another woman smiled and said the two of them looked great together. That made her think about meeting her own husband for the first time. She was quickly comforted. No one knew what was happening on Earth, and maybe her husband was in another tutorial doing fine. Maybe the other tutorials were even easier, and he wasn't facing monsters like these. She thanked Caroline, though what she really wanted was to see her husband again. There were still 30 days left, and the survivor count had already dropped a lot. Caroline believed that once this was over, they'd go back to normal life. A man suddenly rushed in asking for Caroline. He said it was an emergency. Richard needed her right away. Caroline went with him, asking if things were really that serious. On a bed lay William, badly wounded, and no one knew what had happened. They'd found him like that in the forest. He was almost dead, so some thought one of Hayden's men had done it. After thanking the messenger, Caroline told him to bring a bucket of water, and he left them alone with William. Richard asked how bad it was, and Caroline said she didn't know how William was still alive. He wanted to know if she could save him. She was the best healer in the tutorial. Caroline said she could try, but considering what they'd discussed before, she asked if that was really what he wanted. Richard hesitated at the thought of letting William die. Caroline warned that the poison was severe, and even she might not be able to fix it. William had already caused them trouble, so maybe this was a chance to be rid of him. Richard had given Caroline plenty of freedom because she'd proven loyal, but he still made the final call, and he ordered her to heal William. He expected her to obey. With no real choice, Caroline said she'd do what she could. She put her hands over William's chest and started healing him right away. The damage was even worse than she expected, but slowly, William began to improve. Richard wondered if Casper had done this, but Caroline didn't think so. Casper used magic and curses. This was clearly poison. A beast might explain some of it, but the wound on his stomach came from a blade. They considered an ambush, yet Hayden had never shown poison this strong. So a new player might be involved, which made things even messier. Elsewhere in camp, Adam was carrying fabric Joanna had asked for. She thanked him with a big smile. When Adam noticed a crowd outside the infirmary, he asked what was going on. Joanna said a scout had rushed in for Caroline, calling it an emergency. Adam guessed something happened to the hunting teams, but Joanna said nobody knew, only that William had been carried inside. That immediately caught Adam off guard. Outside, Richard was driving the crowd back. Adam then went up to Caroline and asked what happened. She said she'd been coming to see him before this emergency pulled her away. William would probably survive, and she planned to move him to his cabin in case he needed privacy when he woke up. Adam told her he'd help however he could. Caroline said that wouldn't be needed, and that they'd talk later. Adam just nodded, but to himself, he thought that if William got hurt, they needed to know where Casper was. The more time passed, the less control he felt he had. Even so, he refused to give up hope. William remembered a therapy session from back on Earth. It felt strange and unsettling. The therapist asked what he thought about what they'd been discussing, but William acted like he couldn't remember. She said his mother felt like she'd lost both her sons, and asked how that made him feel. Being compared to the sick child disgusted him. It felt like a betrayal. The therapist kept watching him, waiting for an answer. He pretended to sound sorry, but in truth he didn't care at all. He was ready to say anything just to end the session faster. Back in the present, Richard asked if the treatment was working. William started waking and saw the man before him wasn't his father. His memories and reality blurred together, and he thought he saw the therapist again, but this time she was talking about tutorial points. She asked if he remembered the other thing they'd discussed, and now William truly had no idea what was going on. She pressed him again. They'd already talked about it, the thing he lacked. That creepy, terrifying feeling came over him again, and the therapist reminded him it was his deep weakness. He really was pathetic. Weak, broken, and unfit to hold power. William couldn't even tell who the twisted figure before him was. Then he saw the one who had stabbed him. Terror hit him at once. Just remembering Jake filled him with fear. He couldn't shake it off. Everyone in front of him seemed to be smiling at him, like he was a total failure. That only dragged him deeper into despair. At last, William snapped awake from the nightmare, but he had no idea where he was. He looked at his hands and realized it had only been a dream. Richard and Caroline were there, waiting for him to wake up. It was time for a serious talk. Once William sat up, Caroline stepped closer and asked how he felt. He was sweating and rattled, but said he felt fine and didn't know how he got there. They told him a scout found him unconscious in the forest. Without that, he would have died. He began claiming he'd gone into the forest to look for Casper. Richard didn't buy it. He knew William had gone to confront Casper and demanded the truth. William realized he'd been careless. It should have been obvious they figured him out. They had let him move around because he was strong, but he had no real experience and he wasn't subtle at all. Frustrated, he tightened his fists. Richard told him he knew his type well, a gifted young man with real talent, and that kind of potential was exactly what Richard wanted. Hiding his real thoughts, William asked how Richard came to that conclusion. Richard said he noticed it the very first time they met in the forest. To him, William had the eyes of a weapon brought to life. William guessed Richard wanted to recruit him as a soldier, but Richard made it clear he had something bigger in mind. He didn't want William as some regular fighter. He wanted him in his elite group. Richard said he and Caroline would back him in the forest. What he wanted was a partnership. Still unsure, William asked what was stopping him from killing them on the spot. Sure, beating Richard would give him tutorial points and a level, but as a partner, Richard could be worth much more. A faint smile crossed William's face. At last, someone seemed to see his real value. They shook hands, sealing a partnership neither of them fully trusted. When they left, Richard told Caroline to come with him and let William rest. William didn't like being left alone without anyone watching him. He reminded them they were partners now, so he could act as he wanted. Once he recovered, they could discuss who attacked him in the forest. Even knowing this deal could help him, William still struggled to believe it had happened. Outside, Richard and Caroline said everything had gone as planned. Richard bragged that he understood young people who think they're hard to read, say the right thing, and they're easy to control. An hour earlier, they had been talking about how to handle William. Richard understood why Caroline wanted him gone, but he saw other ways to use him. At first, Caroline was interested in the idea. Still, the boy was unbelievably arrogant. He acted like nobody in the world could beat him. After getting crushed like that, she thought his confidence might finally be broken, maybe even enough to make him grow up. Richard disagreed. He believed that confidence would come right back. He expected William to wake up weak and easy to influence. That was the moment to strike. They just needed to feed his ego until he dropped his guard. A little praise and a few empty compliments could turn him into a loyal ally. Caroline worried that one day the boy might betray them. Richard said he had a way to handle that, a special skill. Caroline asked what kind of skill it was. Richard said he got it a few weeks earlier. It was a mission reward. The system ordered him to gather the survivors and remove any rivals in his way. For that, he received a very useful power, one that let him sense when allies were disloyal. Caroline immediately got nervous and asked what it meant for her. Richard told her she had been loyal since the day they met. He said he had never doubted her once. But this wasn't just talk. Richard had already been steering William for a while, using him to get rid of group members he couldn't trust. Keeping that plan moving was his job. In his eyes, that's what a real leader did. Caroline still wanted to know what the skills said about William. For now, Richard said the boy was loyal, so he wasn't a problem yet. William's progress wasn't perfect, but Richard believed they could still shape him into what they needed. Caroline still felt uneasy. She knew Casper was never coming back. Richard reminded her this was never about being kind. To him, William was just an animal, useful for now, but still only an animal. They could feed him and build his loyalty, but Richard wasn't fooling himself about what William was. Once William killed Hayden's leader and cleared the system mission, Richard said there would be no reason to keep that dog around. Only then did Caroline fully grasp his plan. Right now, just a few people in camp were still disloyal. One was the blacksmith, who kept doing his work. Bertram was another name on that list. And then there was Adam, who had started getting more suspicious. Richard believed he'd handle all of them soon enough. Meanwhile, deep in the forest, Jake had fully recovered and was out hunting. This time, he was aiming at an ostrich that had no clue what was coming. MC carefully readied an arrow and poured his new skill into it. Power slowly built in his hands. He needed a little more time, but the ostrich seemed to sense the danger. Right then, Cecil popped up and announced that she had found some mushrooms. That alert was enough to tip the bird off that it was about to become dinner. The ostrich bolted for its life. But Jake had already charged the arrow enough. He fired, sending it blasting forward with huge force. The shot killed the bird instantly, and even smashed through a tree. Cecil was stunned by the damage, and he said this was what his skill could do at full charge. She said he should have used it on William, but Jake answered that the move had drawbacks. He has to stand completely still while charging, and it takes several seconds before it gets really strong. This shot took 12 seconds, and his arms felt like they were going to fall off. It would work best in an ambush. If he had time to prepare, almost no one would see it coming. The system then informed him that killing the creature had leveled him up again. Still, leveling was getting slower, and he guessed the stronger monsters had already been taken down by other survivors. That left him with weaker beasts that barely gave any experience. Cecil suggested something he didn't really want to hear. They should go deeper into the forest. As dangerous as that was, she was right. The problem was running into other survivors. Even worse, he might find no one there at all. He decided to keep going deeper, but they'd stay away from camps, since he didn't want to get dragged into fights that weren't his problem. Cecil agreed, though she knew conflict wasn't the real thing he was avoiding. The morning passed as they kept hunting. Jake even found some eggs. He also tried his luck catching fish from the lake. Then, early that afternoon, he found another dungeon in the forest. The entrance looked familiar, and Cecil noticed there were fewer mushrooms around this time. The notice said he could enter and leave whenever he wanted, making it sound less dangerous than the last dungeon. Since he still needed more levels, this seemed like his best option. So they went in, planning to clear it and beat the boss. Going inside to kill one creature sounded almost too easy, even if it was still risky. Before long, he ran into a giant badger. Cecil got nervous, but she understood Jake had finally found the kind of enemies he needed. Those badgers were much stronger than the monsters outside. Worried for his own safety, Cecil retreated into the necklace. He said the protagonist could call if needed, but he'd rather stay safely inside. Since there were only 2 of them, Jake thought he could manage. To him, they were just small but savage animals. He quickly fired the first arrows. The first badger died almost at once, but his next shots missed the second one. Now it was too close for him to dodge. He had to keep those deadly jaws away from anywhere vital. So he blocked with his forearm and took the bite there instead. It hurt like hell, but that gave him the opening he wanted. He pulled an arrow from his quiver and drove it straight into the badger's chest, killing it. That had been his plan from the start, and because the monsters were high level, he got a lot of experience. He leveled up again. Now he wasn't focused on the boss anymore. He wanted to spend a few hours farming more monsters first. He was all in on leveling now, and he had figured out that the biggest danger was their poison bite. But thanks to his malevolent viper alchemist traits, the poison didn't really matter to him. That let him fight without worrying about getting poisoned. After a while, he felt like he'd gotten a solid workout. The dungeon was doing exactly what he needed. Then Cecil, speaking from the necklace, asked if Jake had noticed something. It had been a long time since he had seen an item like that. There was a treasure chest hidden in the dungeon. MC figured it was finally time for some decent loot. He picked up the chest and opened it. Inside was an icy wind dagger that could deal ice damage. Anyone hit by it would start to feel chilled. Right after that, he gained a new archer skill too. It was Twin Fang style, which boosted agility and strength when he used the right kind of weapon. He had tried fighting with 2 blades before, though one of them had really just been an arrow. Maybe the system had noticed he was more capable now. The dungeon kept proving its worth, even before he found the boss. The moment he said that, a huge roar echoed through the cave. There was only one thing that could mean: the boss had arrived. Deeper in the cave, he spotted the creature that seemed to make the roar. It was the Nest Mother. The system didn't show her level. It gave no extra details either, which could only mean she was far above him. Cecil said they had enough fun already and should leave now, but Jake refused. He remembered Ollie mentioning a creature called the Lord of Beasts when he first came to this world, and the monster in front of them fit that idea perfectly. Cecil asked what made him think that. If its level was hidden because it was too strong, then by basic game rules, this had to be the boss. He planned to open with a poisoned arrow, then follow with a charged shot. He couldn't waste this chance. At times like this, Cecil really regretted leaving the library behind. With his bow lined up, Jake wanted to finish it in one hit. The energy finally started building, and the beast didn't notice a thing. He put all his focus into the shot, counting each second so he'd fire at the perfect time. The moment it peaked, he let the arrow fly. It hit with far more power than the first time he used the skill. But then the monster sensed the danger. That instantly put Jake on edge. Because of that, his arrow missed the main target. Still, it clipped one of the creature's legs, so the poison might spread anyway. Realizing it had been poisoned, the beast ripped off the injured flesh without hesitation. As Jake reset his stance, he understood just how terrifying a Lord of Beasts really was. The monster rushed him while he readied another arrow. This time, he fired a normal one. The creature answered with a massive roar. The sound wave smashed the arrow to pieces. It also wrecked the protagonist's hearing. He never expected a sonic attack. Stunned and covering his ears, he got slashed. The hit was bad enough to make him cough up blood. Then he noticed he'd been poisoned. He thought he was immune to its venom too, but he was wrong. The beast knew it still had to finish him off. Jake took off running. He needed space to attack again. He asked Cecil for health potions, but all they had left was poison. That was when MC realized poison might be exactly what he needed. He stopped backing away and started baiting the creature in. From the pendant, he pulled out a vial of poison. The monster kept coming straight at him. Jake threw the vial and hoped his plan would work. He wanted the beast to block it the same way it stopped the arrow, with that sonic blast, because the shock would shatter the vial, sending the poison forward instead. And that's exactly what happened. The poison badly hit one of the creature's eyes. Even hurt, it started screaming again, but this time Jake had no idea why. Then badgers started pouring in from all over the dungeon. They came from every direction. The giant beast had called in more monsters, all ready to devour him. He was completely surrounded. The boss's reinforcements had answered. Jake reached for the dagger he wanted to save for later, but he had no other choice now. The second he fought with 2 daggers, Twin Fang style kicked in. With that boost and his new weapon, the badgers couldn't match him. He cut through them like toys, though he still took some hits. Even while getting hurt, he kept crushing them. One badger bit him again, but anything that got close died for it. Several tried to jump him from behind, but Jake caught every one of them. Soon, every creature the boss had summoned was dead. Now only the boss remained. The protagonist attacked first, wanting this over fast. The creature charged too, refusing to back down, but the second it got close, Jake carved into it hard. By killing a level 68 monster, he earned a huge amount of tutorial points. Even Cecil hadn't believed MC could pull that off. He had nothing left. His strength gave out, and his daggers slipped from his hands. His eyes shut for a moment, and then, out of nowhere, Jake started screaming. Since he cleared the dungeon alone, he also got a bonus reward. Cecil noted the place was a total wreck, while the protagonist just said he needed a nap. A moment later, he noticed his archer class had leveled up too. Beating the dungeon boss gave him 6 levels at once. After stretching, he decided to leave before anything else showed up. Before he could move, the system hit him with another notice. He didn't expect to get one more skill. It let him merge with shadows, but only while moving in a straight line. The description sounded familiar. Jake was sure he'd seen that name in the library. If he remembered right, it referred to one of them. Cecil hoped the Viper wouldn't take offense, since that could count as blasphemy, but MC doubted the god was that kind of being. Besides, the skill was way too useful to ignore. An hour later, they were outside the forest. Jake hung from a tree branch, wrapped in shadow, until he suddenly vanished and reappeared on top of a big rock. He told Cecil to watch, then jumped toward the tree. Once more he disappeared, and reappeared right in front of the tree, smashing his head into it. Rubbing the hit, he said he still liked the skill a lot. Jake held his head, clearly in pain. Cecil floated over and joked that it was nice to find something he wasn't good at. Still, he figured he would master it in a few days. The idea behind it was simple enough. To the protagonist, it felt like revving a motorcycle. There was a burst of push to it, and he'd get used to that soon. Cecil thought it felt more like teleporting. It was hard to explain, but Jake basically turned into a shadow too, and that shadow leaped in a straight line from one spot to another. Now the real question was whether he could pass through solid objects. Cecil was disappointed when that seemed unlikely. There went any dream of grand heists. MC kept saying the skill was still new. Once he mastered it, it could become insanely strong. Elsewhere, in the Hall of the Malevolent Viper, a woman was carrying out a ritual. Her people had done this for generations. No matter how much time passed, their hope never died, and neither did their faith. Still, all they had left now was a single temple. She waited for the Viper's return, and prayed for a sign. Then a man entered to speak with the master of the hall. Annoyed at being interrupted, she hoped it was for something important. The messenger said the Lord Protector wanted her at once. That was serious enough to make her fear something had gone wrong, but the messenger knew nothing more, so she set out right away. This would be only the second time she had ever seen the Lord Protector. The first was during her consecration as master. He hadn't even appeared at the previous master's funerals, which made her both nervous and afraid that something major had finally happened. With those thoughts racing through her head, she stepped through the portal. When she arrived before the Lord Protector, she said she came as soon as she heard. He hurried her inside, and just as she was about to ask what was wrong, she saw the obelisk glowing brightly. There was only one meaning behind that. The malevolent Viper was drawing near. After ages of waiting, he would return and raise their order back to its former glory. Rwanda knew then that her faith hadn't been wasted. It was wonderful news. But joy quickly turned into panic. There was so much to prepare. The temple had to be perfect, and the other leaders needed to be told. She only hoped the Viper wouldn't arrive too soon, and would give them a few more days. Lost in that worry, she noticed the obelisk shining even brighter. Then a strange voice greeted the little ones. The Viper asked if they had missed him. The elder could hardly believe his lord had truly returned. The Viper apologized for the long wait, then hugged the elder and thanked him for all he had done. Viridia couldn't understand that warmth, or why the protector was in tears. She had imagined this day her whole life, but not like this. When the Viper asked who she was, he learned she was the last master left and now the highest-ranking disciple. He then asked her name, and learned she was Viridia. She felt honored to welcome him back, and apologized for not doing it properly. The Viper told her to relax. He only asked for her name, not for her to kneel. Really, he was the one who should apologize, but since he'd already said that to the elder, he wasn't saying it twice. That just wasn't like him. Calmly, he added that everything was fine, and the fact their order still survived was already amazing. Viridia flushed when the deity patted her head. The elder wanted to know what had brought the Viper back, though he nervously claimed he was just curious. The Viper seemed uneasy with all the stiffness and suggested they maybe share a drink. Viridia quickly offered to arrange it, and the Viper seemed pleased by her eagerness. Then he explained to the elder that his return had to do with the universe. He asked if the elder remembered the dungeon he made in the Second Era. Someone had finally cleared it. That was unbelievable. The elder wondered if the Viper had gained a new follower, but that wasn't it. As impossible as it sounded, he had made a friend. Meanwhile, by a campfire in the forest, Jake was wondering what was worse, eating mushrooms for weeks, or the fact he was starting to enjoy them. Cecil pointed out that mushrooms were still way better than moss and dust. He said Earth had all kinds of stakes, and he missed them badly. He asked if Cecil missed anything from his home world, but nothing specific came to mind. Jake had already noticed Cecil always got careful around that topic, and never explained how he ended up inside the pendant. It was a long story, so Cecil said he'd save it for when he was drunk. The protagonist at least took comfort in the fact that Cecil knew what alcohol was. Then, right in the middle of talking, MC sensed something. He immediately told Cecil to get back into the pendant. When Cecil didn't react, he snapped at him more firmly. Cecil still had no clue what was going on. Jake stepped out into the clearing and called out, saying he knew they were there. that made them show themselves, demanding to know who he was and why he was in their territory. The protagonist played it calm, saying he was just an archer, not a threat, and had only been out hunting. Then, the wounded mythic scepter asked if his name was MC. After confirming it, he asked how she knew that. Her answer was a huge block of ice. Cast, she said, for Mickey's sake. Jake dodged and admitted he had no idea who Mickey even was. He tried to calm things down, saying this had to be a mistake. He didn't know that person, and there was no reason to fight. But the swordsman cut in and told them not to listen. Richard had warned them he was dangerous, and had almost beaten the metal mage. So they meant William, and Richard had probably put a bounty on him. There was no talking this out now, and honestly, Jake would have rather ended this peacefully. Too bad these 5 idiots were about to die. Full of confidence, the group rushed him. The protagonist slipped past the first attack. The hammer user swung that giant weapon up again. At the same time, the swordsman thought he'd finally closed the gap. Instead, Jake vanished right in front of them and appeared behind them an instant later. An arrow suddenly cut through the air. That told MC they had an archer too. The shot smashed through a tree, blowing it apart on impact. That enemy archer had the same skill Jake used himself, so he already knew how to answer it. But when he fired back, the sorceress stopped his shot with an ice wall. Annoying as it was, their teamwork was solid. Then another boosted arrow came straight at him, but Jake slipped through the shadows and avoided it. This fight was turning into more trouble than he expected. The frontliners pressed the attack again. He realized he couldn't keep depending on his bow, so he pulled both daggers. With blades ready, he caught the incoming strikes. Somewhere nearby, a hidden assassin waited for the right moment. Jake could feel the pressure building. For a moment, he looked completely boxed in. One of the warriors expected him to blink away again, and tried to guess where he'd appear. But the protagonist chose something bolder. He let the sword hit him. That opened the warrior up. The hammer fighter tried to finish things fast, but Jake's dagger was already tearing into his stomach. Watching his ally get gutted, the other warrior finally lost his nerve. Even the sorceress hadn't expected anyone to die. Without showing pain, MC asked who wanted to go next. Weeks earlier, he'd asked the Viper how he dealt with this. He meant killing people, not innocents, he made clear, but enemies. A lot had changed in those weeks. He'd gone from office worker to real fighter. He didn't regret the battles he'd survived, but he still thought about them all the time. The Viper answered by saying he'd tell the child a story. Before becoming a god, he'd only just gained a humanoid body. Back then, he thought it might be nice to fit into civilized society. Before that, he'd only dealt with beasts. They could be deadly, but at least they didn't lie. People, on the other hand, often did. To him, lying and deceitful people were the real monsters. In under a year, someone he trusted as a friend betrayed him and stole everything. He gave them another chance out of innocence, and they betrayed him again. The fight that followed was so brutal it destroyed 9 planets. Maybe some would call that too much, but after that, hardly anyone dared cross him. Jake wanted to know how anyone destroys 9 planets, but the Viper said that story could wait. What mattered now was the lesson. Act without hesitation, and show no mercy, because anyone trying to kill him would never spare him either. The sorceress was horrified, as one of her allies got put down in brutal fashion. Jake told them his name was Morpheus now, and he'd be putting the rest to sleep too. The swordsman who had acted so cocky suddenly looked much less sure of himself. Still, the sorceress forced herself to stay steady and told the others not to panic. As she gathered power, she ordered them to keep him busy. She was about to end this. The knight realized she was casting her strongest spell, so he had to buy her time. He rushed in hard, but Jake met the blade cleanly with his daggers. The knight shifted his sword to keep the pressure on, and the protagonist matched him blow for blow. The two traded a fast string of strikes. Even then, the warrior could feel Jake getting sharper with every clash. MC, meanwhile, was still looking for an opening. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught something moving. Another charged arrow was coming. Its impact was devastating. Then they realized he had melted into the shadows and needed to be found fast. Even the assassin's sharp senses couldn't find him. It was like he'd vanished completely. That worry didn't last long, because worry is for the living. Jake had already killed another one. The sorceress shouted that her spell was nearly ready. At that moment, the enemy archer started hearing something very wrong. He yelled for the warrior to watch his surroundings. Too late, the poor guy had already become firewood. He couldn't warn his teammate in time, and now rage took over. He readied another arrow, furious, and started mocking Jake. But before he could finish, the protagonist struck, and his head parted ways with the rest of him. Covered in blood, the sorceress knew she was finished. The last body hit the ground, and her fully charged spell ended up doing nothing at all. Jake told her the train to her next life was here. She could answer a few questions and live, or find out whether God was real. He asked why Richard and William had sent them after him. It was revenge. MC couldn't understand that. Everything he'd done had been self-defense, but the sorceress believed he was the one who caused all those deaths and started this war. That reminded him, William had mentioned a war before. The sorceress didn't have much time left. Still, Jake kept his word and handed her a health potion. She tossed the vial into the air. She'd rather die than accept mercy from him, though she still answered his questions. He was stunned by how stupid that choice was. Her life slowly slipped away. Then she collapsed dead, leaving Jake more confused than ever. He pulled out the pendant on his necklace. Cecil asked what was happening, but the protagonist knew just as little. He hadn't started this war. As crazy as it sounded, this all looked like one massive setup, and MC was sure they'd been manipulated. Someone in that forest was trying to pin everything on him. Jake had no plan to sit around and take it. Once the fight was done, they made a huge fire to burn what was left of their enemies. Cecil asked if he wanted to say anything. He just watched the flames. Then he apologized. If it were up to him, none of this would have happened, and nobody would have died. He still didn't know how Richard and William had fooled everyone, but he swore he'd end it for the dead. Cecil quietly wished for them to rest in peace too. After everything in the forest, Jake had finally reached level 31. Those system messages made him feel sick. It felt like he was taking the lives and effort of the people he'd just killed. Cecil tried to comfort him, saying he'd earned it, but the protagonist didn't see it that way. Rewards were for monsters, not this. That dungeon boss had pushed him to his limit. This fight, though, felt empty. Cecil pointed out the points were already his, and that wouldn't change. Now he had to decide how to use them. Jake looked down at his blood-covered hands and thought. He couldn't just storm Richard's camp and demand answers. Strong or not, he couldn't take on a whole army. Then Cecil reminded him there might not be that many left. But even in the worst case, there could still be hundreds. So Jake forced himself to think clearly, and wondered what Adam would do. Elsewhere, Richard and the others had gathered in the forest. Adam was shocked by what they were saying about MC. The elder couldn't believe one archer was fighting off whole squads by himself. Richard argued he was no normal archer. He thought he was trying to clear the tutorial. The system pushed people toward the biggest rewards, and Richard believed that was Jake's goal. Hayden asked if Richard really thought this was the man who killed his son. Richard said his own men weren't the ones who attacked Hayden's group. They'd seen the bodies. No ordinary soldiers could have done that kind of damage. Even so, Hayden demanded to know how Richard knew this mysterious archer. Adam explained that the protagonist had once traveled with him, but he wasn't convinced the protagonist had done all this. MC liked working alone, but he wasn't the kind of scumbag who'd do something like that. Back in the tutorial, he had already shown he was a strong fighter, but plenty of other people there were gifted too. So Adam asked if a third group had been moving through the forest the whole time. Richard clearly did not like where this was going. Adam kept backing Jake, saying they still had no real proof. Richard told Hayden not to buy that, arguing Adam was still blinded by old loyalty. To Richard, all signs pointed to the protagonist. He pressed the old man to be realistic and actually do something. If Adam accepted that idea, he wanted to know what they planned next. Richard suggested they join forces, search the forest, find Jake, and kill him. Hayden still had doubts. Even so, he agreed to work with Richard until this was settled. Adam was furious. He came hoping to find another answer, but instead he watched the two of them pick a new target, while the real culprit stayed safe. After taking down a few monsters, he figured the meeting was over by now. Soon, his enemy would be finished for good. What he had done earned him tutorial points, and with them came a new unique skill. Now he could summon an iron spear, and he loved that. Then something burst from the bushes, the perfect test for his new power. The unlucky dinosaur charged in, not knowing it was rushing straight to its death. The liar readied the spear. He hurled it with all his might, and it slammed into the beast's neck. The new skill was pretty impressive. He had to admit Jake crushed him last time, but things were different now. He was much stronger. Then he started dealing with the remains. Holding the creature's head, he told himself he would be the one to clear the tutorial. The temple master was shocked to hear the viper had made a friend. A primordial being choosing a mortal, especially one who had not even cleared the tutorial, was unheard of. She held the highest rank in the order, and this man might threaten that. A priest arrived after being called for. After everything that happened that afternoon, she wanted him to dig up information, every record he could find. He asked if she had someone specific in mind. She did. She wanted everything on the man named Jake Thane. She needed all of it before meeting him herself. Deep in the forest, MC searched for Caroline and Adam, but he had no idea whether anyone was still alive. Then he caught movement in the bushes. Not knowing who was there, he carefully told them to come out. It was Casper, badly hurt, who had finally found him. He dropped to the ground and said he could not keep going. Jake quickly asked who did this, and Casper said William and Richard attacked the whole camp. No one was spared. Everyone died. He pictured the massacre, and all his friends lying dead. In despair, Casper asked why the protagonist had left them, saying that choice helped bring them down. Jake jolted awake in panic. It was only a nightmare. He stared at his hands and realized none of it was real. Cecil said maybe he should ease up on the mushrooms, since they were probably messing with his head. Maybe he was right, because the nightmares were getting worse. Cecil said dreams can be the mind's way of handling things left unresolved. Maybe MC needed to let some of it go. Jake thought Cecil might be right, and wondered what kind of nightmares Cecil had escaped from. Cecil admitted that while trapped in the pendant, sleeping was all he could do. so he had already lived through his worst nightmare. He was sick of wandering through the brush, so he made Cecil a deal. He would share his dreams if Cecil explained how he got trapped. With nothing better to do, Cecil agreed. Jake said his dreams always came back to his old friends. He entered this place with his coworkers. Some were close to him, others barely knew him. Back at work, he was the kind of guy who did the minimum and could hardly talk to people. But once he reached the forest, everything changed fast. For the first time, he felt like he could start over. He was wrong. His friends wanted to survive, while he wanted a new life. That difference led to serious fights, and in the end he went his own way, leaving them exposed to people they should not have trusted. In every nightmare, he finds them dead. The person telling him changes each time, but one thing never does. They all say he abandoned them, and that everything is his fault. Maybe if he had stayed to protect them, things could have changed. Maybe they were right. After hearing that, Cecil tried to comfort him, saying that was a heavy weight to carry. Then Cecil began telling Jake how he ended up inside the pendant. He said it was not a great story, and admitted he used to be a lot like the protagonist. Ages ago, he was one of the lowest members in the cult that worshipped the evil viper. People made him a joke, and even new recruits looked down on him. Still, he had a small group of friends. They were always kind to him, and he helped them test new potions and enchantments. Looking back, he felt less like a friend and more like their guinea pig. Then one day, they asked him to test a pendant they had made, and just like that, everything went wrong. He was pulled into an empty dimension. At least he could still see what was happening outside. He watched his former friends panic as they tried to get him out, until they gave up, left the pendant there, and walked away. He remembered dust slowly covering it over the years. Now and then people wondered where he had gone, but sooner or later they all accepted that he had vanished. No one truly searched for him. He had been left behind in that pendant. Cecil was abandoned, while Jake was the one who did the leaving. But Cecil told him he was not a monster. Life does not always go the way people want, and the abandonment itself was not what made Cecil bitter. What hurt most was how his so-called friends just accepted the worst and moved on. Eventually, he became nothing more than an old memory, and MC did not have to make the same mistake. Jake admitted the real problem was that he did not want to learn his friends might be dead. Cecil told him to face that if it came, because there was still hope, his friends might still need him. He remembered telling them he had his own goals in this place, and warning them to stay together if they wanted better odds of surviving. He also told them not to worry about him, that he would reach out when the time was right. Thinking back on that, he started to feel guilty. He got to his feet and said Cecil was right. He had been running from this for too long. Now he would find Adam and settle everything once and for all. At dawn they would head out. Cecil asked if he even knew where to go, since they had already walked for hours and found nothing but a few creatures, very hungry ones. Jake told him to quit whining. He had a health potion and would be fine, though that would not fix emotional damage, which made the protagonist laugh. Truthfully, he had no clue where the camp was, but if they followed the river, they should find it. The camp used that spot for fishing and washing clothes, and every settlement needed water to survive. Cecil said Jake was starting to sound like a real hunter, but after a month out here, learning a few things was unavoidable. The little imp then asked if MC had prepared what he wanted to say. He said they first needed to watch the camp from a distance, because Casper had been setting traps before he left, and if Casper had grown as much as Jake had, walking in blindly could be like stepping into a minefield. Cecil reminded him he was going there to talk to his friends, not start a fight. He needed to focus on talking. Some of those people really were his friends, but others were worse than enemies. If he could just speak with Adam, he might clear things up, especially since he was being blamed for something he never did. The trouble was what happened if that failed. Then traps would be the least of his problems. All they could do was hope it worked out. Then, midway through the trip, Jake suddenly stopped. Cecil asked what was wrong, but the protagonist told him to stay quiet. Pointing ahead, he asked if Cecil could see it too. Something like an invisible curtain stood in front of them. It was faint and watery, and Jake was sure it was magical. His sight warped when he looked through it, which confirmed it was a magic barrier. Maybe it was there to keep intruders out, or, worse, to trap something inside. They still did not know the answer, but MC wanted to cross it and find out. Cecil stopped him, warning that they had no idea if he could come back out. He could get stuck in there and never reach his friends. Jake took a breath and admitted that was possible, so he chose to find his friends first and deal with the barrier later. Still, he could not help wondering if some monster was waiting on the other side. At last, he found the camp. Cecil praised Jake's sharp eyes, because from where he was, he could not see a thing. What he did notice were people already grumbling through their morning chores. The camp had been built up well. It even looked like they had a blacksmith now. When he noticed a few girls gathered around a table, he was impressed. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Joanna's leg was fully healed. Jake had told Cecil she was one of his old friends. He was there the night she got jumped during the tutorial. Back then, he couldn't save her fast enough, but Caroline somehow healed her. Cecil was glad to see him smile. Seeing a familiar face gave him hope the others might still be alive too. Now he just had to find Adam. Adam had only just woken up and was still half asleep. He decided not to wake Caroline yet. There were only 25 days left in the tutorial. He still believed things would go back to normal when it ended. He had a hunt later and thought about stopping by the blacksmith first. Outside, everyone was already up and busy. He just hoped today stayed peaceful. Then, something unexpected caught his eye. An arrow shot straight toward him. It stuck in the ground at his feet. A rolled parchment was tied to it, and he quickly picked it up. After reading it, he froze in surprise. Jake was asking to meet him. Elsewhere, the protagonist got a system message saying he had killed a colossal bat. More of them were still chasing him. He brought down several more and kept fighting. With his new spear, cutting them down was easy. They dropped like weak little monsters. And like a total madman, he loved every second of it. One after another, the bats hit the ground dead. He spent the whole morning hunting and trying out his new skill. For all the trouble, this was the life he had always wanted. Covered in monster blood, he had never felt stronger. Before he would have cleaned up before going back, but with Richard backing him now, he didn't care. Looking scary didn't matter anymore. That innocent act of his wasn't fooling anybody now, and on top of that, he had huge power. Back in camp, he noticed it was strangely empty. Most people seemed packed inside a cabin. Something was clearly going on in Caroline's place. Still, he didn't need to pretend he cared. If it mattered, Richard would tell him. Inside, everyone was in a meeting, setting the arrow on the table. One of them said someone had gone after Adam. Adam corrected him. It wasn't an attack. Jake was asking for a meeting. Richard picked up the arrow and looked it over. His gut told him it might be a trap. Adam didn't buy that. If MC wanted him dead, he'd already be dead. This felt more like a real attempt to talk things out, but Richard wasn't convinced. Maybe Jake knew people were hunting him and wanted to talk first, but Richard was the one leading that hunt, and he figured he was just making the first move. One of the women didn't want this turning violent, while someone else argued the protagonist started it. She admitted she barely knew him, but he never seemed evil to her. On the first night, he was the one who protected her. Caroline didn't see it that way. Maybe he was just chasing thrills. Richard then asked some of them to leave the cabin. Joanna Elkman and Bertram mattered to the camp, but too many voices would only make this harder. He wanted only himself, Caroline, and Adam in the discussion. Adam agreed, though he said he'd still keep his friends updated on what happened. At last, the three of them were alone. Richard liked Adam, but he couldn't risk losing the camp's best healer. Then Adam said he would go to the meeting alone. Caroline shut that down immediately. Either they both went, or nobody went. Richard had no intention of sending them into a possible trap. Adam might be a leader people looked up to, but he wasn't a killer. He couldn't handle someone who could wipe out whole squads alone. Adam argued they could meet close to camp, and if things went bad, he could run. Richard called him an idiot for risking his life over a coworker, but Adam knew MC well, and MC had helped the camp before. All he wanted was one chance, and a little trust. Richard admitted that since both of them had been helping from the start, he had even wondered if Adam was an enemy too, and Caroline stepped between them and told them to calm down. She asked Adam to go outside and settle the others. Honestly, he needed a moment too. He was badly shaken. So he agreed and walked out. His friends asked how it went. He said it went horribly, but he was still meeting Jake. Bertram worried that going alone into the forest was too dangerous. Still, Adam had known him for years, and something about all this felt wrong. They all knew what the protagonist could do. Since the first night, he had already taken out dozens of Richard's men. Even so, if Adam trusted him, they should at least consider his side. Then Caroline came out and said they could meet Jake the next day. She had talked Richard into it. Adam had no clue how she pulled that off. As the camp's best healer, she had leverage. Her message was simple: they go, or she leaves. Adam was honestly impressed. She may have fallen out with MC, but she still didn't think he was some monster. If this mattered to Adam, it mattered to her too. Adam was so grateful he could barely hide it. She hugged him and promised to stay by his side until the end. Meanwhile, Richard was burning with jealousy. He dreamed about that blonde all the time. The only question was, which blonde? The next day, Jake reached the meeting spot. A stream ran nearby, with a cut stump close by. He was sure this was the right place. Cecil asked why his friends picked that spot. Jake guessed they didn't want to get too far from camp or too deep into the woods, and if they got attacked, they'd have a quick way out. Cecil pointed out that being the pessimist was supposed to be his job. He trusted his friends, but they had spent a long time in Richard's camp. Long enough for trust to change. They might have picked a side already. Cecil hoped not. Richard was a dangerous lunatic. Jake told him to stay in the pendant since he had no idea what was coming and couldn't protect him. Cecil agreed, though he really hoped the protagonist wouldn't die and trap him in there again. MC touched his hand and promised to do his best. Then, Cecil went back into the pendant. As Adam's group moved through the forest, someone asked what the plan was. Adam first warned him to take his hand off his sword. They weren't going there to fight. The guy apologized, saying everyone was just tense. Adam said he would handle the talking and keep things calm. No weapons, no spells. This was only a talk between coworkers. Jake was already waiting. It was time to talk. They walked up to him, and he gave off a strange, hard-to-read vibe. He lowered his hood and greeted them with a wide smile. Adam apologized for being late, surprised by how much his friend had changed. Jake joked that he had been getting in some exercise. Even stronger than before, he still thought Adam looked just as nervous as ever. They stepped closer and started with small talk, but the tension never really left. The protagonist asked how everyone else was doing. Adam said things at camp were fine. Caroline, though, felt like everyone had been acting weird. Since she'd been brought there, she wanted the truth. Jake said people in the forest had been accusing him of things he never did. Caroline cut in and asked how many people he had already killed. Adam didn't like her jumping in, but she pressed MC to answer. He admitted it was a lot, but not enough to start a war. Bertram was uneasy too, and wanted him to be honest. Jake insisted everything he had done was self-defense. From what they could see, he was nothing like William had described. They were expecting someone sneaky and violent. Little by little, they realized William had lied big time. He asked what that clown had been saying about him. They told him William had come back too. Jake said that idiot had tried to reach him right before this meeting. He warned Adam not to trust William. He was completely insane. Adam said he already had doubts, and even suspected William killed Casper. That hit the protagonist hard. The others said that was their belief, and they were shocked MC hadn't heard yet. Every night, he checked the survivor count and wondered if his friends were still alive. When he saw Joanna Elkman alive while watching the camp, he felt relieved. If she survived, maybe the others had too. Now, with tears in his eyes, he realized Casper was already gone. Even while breaking down, he insisted he was still okay. Caroline instantly regretted coming. To her, this whole thing was a mistake. Adam wanted to know what she meant. She said he should have stayed at camp, but now it was too late. Jake suddenly sensed someone else nearby with them. He heard rustling in the bushes. His hand moved to the quiver for an arrow. Drawing his bow, he warned them to stop hiding. He already knew they were there. Adam tried to stop him, but Richard had already stepped out, admitting Jake's senses were insanely sharp. With his sword on his shoulder, Richard said he was glad to see him. Seeing him made the protagonist snap, and he asked Adam if this had all been a setup. Adam quickly said no. Richard backed him up and said Adam knew nothing about this. He said Adam could never have helped anyway. He would have ruined the whole plan. Adam instantly understood he had been betrayed. Caroline tried to say sorry, but he was too angry to hear it after being lied to. He admitted that, after hearing all those stories, he might have doubted Jake too. Everyone kept calling him a monster. Still, Adam had heard it all, and chose to believe his friend. Caroline, though, trusted strangers over him. Richard told MC to come with him, so they could settle everything. If Jake was innocent, they could leave all this behind. Richard even claimed he could overlook the death of his archer from their first meeting. His sharpened instincts picked up the killing intent coming off him. He knew for sure Richard was lying. The protagonist told him to call off his men, then they could talk. Adam hadn't even noticed others were hiding nearby. Then Hayden stepped out with his men and praised Jake's sharp senses. He and Richard had planned this together. Adam realized the whole meeting was a trap, and he'd been used. They had MC boxed in from every side. Jake was furious that he'd let himself get trapped. Richard asked one last time if he would surrender. He searched for a way out, but there wasn't one. Hayden lost patience and cast a spell. A fireball shot straight at the protagonist. It exploded hard, but MC dodged in time. The second he touched down, he fired back. His arrow flew right for Hayden, but the mage raised a shield and blocked it. Richard told the warriors to hold their ground, while Hayden ordered the mages to close in around Jake. They pressed their hands to the ground and started a bigger spell. He felt the earth under him crack apart. Things had gone from bad to worse. Hayden declared Jake wouldn't escape this time and attacked again. Another blast went off, and the protagonist was suddenly gone, like he had teleported. He appeared on top of a broken stump. Adam begged Richard to stop, but Richard insisted this was the only way. Adam turned to the woman he couldn't trust anymore, hoping she'd help. At this rate, they were going to hit their own ally. Caroline said it was too late to stop now. The archers were already getting ready to fire again, and the mages kept attacking without pause. Their plan was simple: wear Jake down. They meant to throw everything at him until he fell. Richard urged them on. Inside the pendant, Cecil was getting seriously worried. Jake needed to get out of there now, but there was almost nothing he could do. Too many attacks were coming at once, and one mage was stopping him from slipping through the shadows. The trap kept closing, and teleporting wasn't working. That's when MC noticed one foot had already been pinned. Every second made it worse. Richard gave the order to the archers to fire. A storm of arrows came at him. Jake couldn't avoid them all, and one hit. Another went through his leg. Now the young man was hurt and stuck in place. He shouted in rage and demanded to be released. Richard moved in to finish him. Adam desperately looked for some way to save Jake. Cecil was panicking too. Standing over him, Richard said this was the end. The protagonist fought against the bindings, but he had almost no strength left. Richard's sword was closing in on his neck. Jake was nearly ready to accept it. He had no way out. After all the fights he had survived, and all the monsters he had killed, the thing he couldn't beat was betrayal. His only hope now was that someone would find the pendant and free Cecil, because it looked like this was the end for him. Then the system suddenly announced he had unlocked Primal Hunter's moment of bloodline. Jake stared at the message, completely confused, but his body had already begun to evolve. He felt himself changing, and had no clue what was happening. His heartbeat sped up more and more. Then instinct took over. That instant seemed to stretch forever. Now he could feel all the mana around him. It was like a huge reservoir was filling inside his core. There was only one thing left to do: let that power burst out. A shockwave exploded from him, and blasted everyone back. Richard was thrown with the rest. Jake let out a roar as power poured off his body. Everyone could only stare. Hayden guessed it had to be some kind of magic, and MC finally tore himself free. Then he rose to his feet. Adam was stunned by what he was seeing. He didn't even know what Jake had become anymore. Caroline, of course, took this as proof the rumors were true. To her, he really was a monster now. Richard told the others not to panic. One man couldn't beat all of them. He ordered an immediate attack, and the fighters rushed in straight toward death. Jake slowly drew his daggers. He took one breath and steadied himself. Then he moved so fast they could barely follow him. The first man died instantly, then the second right after him. The third didn't even notice his chest had been cut open. It happened so fast they only realized too late they were already dead. Seeing he was next, one of them shouted for a defensive line. The soldiers with swords and shields obeyed at once. Jake slipped past them like they were nothing. He dropped poison vials among the men as he moved. The toxin hit them hard. They started breaking down from the poison while the protagonist stood over the chaos. It was terrifyingly strong. The men melted under it. Adam was horrified by the sight. None of them could stop Jake. They were dying for nothing. Hayden, still sure of himself, thought he could end it. He had wanted to save this spell for an emergency, but now he had no choice. As sickly wings formed on his back, he knew he was out of options. He charged in and swore Jake would not leave alive. MC quickly realized the mage was incredibly fast. He had to focus on dodging. Those wings were deadly. If one strike had landed, he could have lost a limb. The old man told him to stop running and give up. Jake knew his speed alone wasn't enough, and more reinforcements would join soon. His only real way out was Path of Shadows. This time, he prayed it would work. Cecil had warned him there was some kind of barrier here. Now Jake finally understood. He was being contained. He didn't know who was doing it, until he heard an apology. It was Caroline. She had already gone too far, and wasn't backing out now. She wouldn't let him escape. Adam begged Caroline to drop the barrier. The protagonist worried about what this would mean for his friend. Adam kept saying none of this was needed. He tried to reason with her, but she ignored him. Then someone struck Adam hard in the back of the neck. It was Richard. He knew words wouldn't work. Richard admitted that move had saved them. For a moment he thought Jake would get away, but to him, this only proved they had been right. MC was too dangerous, so he had to die. Richard told Hayden to finish it, and the old man was happy to do it. Once again, Jake was trapped with nowhere to run. Maybe, if he charged an arrow, he could break the barrier. He had one shot, and it had to count. Hayden came at him, eager to avenge his son. The attack smashed through the barrier and slammed brutally into his chest. Hayden's face showed both rage and joy. He thought Jake had nowhere left to go. Blood spilled from the protagonist's mouth. The mage believed the fight was finally over. Blood splattered everywhere. Hayden wanted Jake to die slowly and in pain. But if this was how it ended for him, MC decided he would drag the old man down with him. Then Hayden felt his skin start to burn and realized something was on his hands. The protagonist had spent weeks perfecting that poison. While charging the attack, he had coated his hands with it. His own resistance kept him from feeling the effects, but Hayden would melt all the way to the bone. He knew he had to get away fast, and dropped his weapon at once. Jake then tried to pull the thing out of his chest. He screamed from the pain, but at last he tore himself free. Hayden said it didn't matter. MC had to be too weak to keep fighting. From a distance he could finish him safely. Jake really was in terrible shape, and now a huge attack was coming straight at him. Still, he had managed to separate himself from the others. Then the blast tore through the area. The others rushed over to Hayden, asking what happened, because there was no sign of Jake anywhere. Richard was furious. There wasn't even a body. Hayden confirmed their target had escaped. The protagonist had slipped away through the shadows, but he still had to stay hidden from the people chasing him. Cecil was frantic with worry. Jake told him to stay inside the necklace. They still weren't safe. First he had to find somewhere secure to rest and heal. Meanwhile, the others searched the forest for MC. This was their best shot at finding any trace of him. Richard was a daemon, and he had to die. Jake could tell they were closing in. It wouldn't be long before they picked up his trail. Cecil warned him that something was up ahead. It was the same barrier they'd seen before, but they had no idea what was waiting on the other side. If it worked like a dungeon, weaker players wouldn't be able to enter, which might keep Jake safe. The problem was that he could be running into something even worse. Still, he had no choice but to risk it. He finally crossed the barrier. He took a few careful steps inside. His senses picked up nothing strange, so maybe the place was safe. At last, he got a moment to breathe. That peace didn't last long. Several creatures were already there, and they clearly weren't friendly. Bad luck, but that's how it went. This would be a horrible way to die. He'd lost too much blood and barely had any strength left. The creatures attacked, but he could hardly even feel the pain. He was sure this was the end. Killed by monsters he could have beaten easily if he were healthy. Pathetic things that weren't even worth much experience. Then, the Viper called him out for barging into someone's home without announcing himself. Jake was suddenly fully healed. He'd been right on the edge of death, and he had no clue what happened. The Viper asked if he remembered the blessing from their last meeting. The protagonist asked what that meant, and the Viper explained their link went both ways. It just hadn't expected the boy to show up so suddenly. Seeing his body had no injuries, Jake worried the Viper had summoned him there, but it said it only helped them move along. MC had started it himself. When he asked where they were, the Viper said it was basically its room, or headquarters. That sounded way too modest to the protagonist. Still, being a god probably meant being full of yourself. The Viper told him to sit beside it. MC quickly noticed his necklace was gone and panicked, since Cecil was inside it. The Viper told him the necklace was still with his real body, so he must have released Cecil before passing out. After sitting down, Jake asked if he was really there, and where his real body was. He learned he wasn't dead, but he wasn't exactly alive either. He immediately wanted to go back because Cecil was in danger. The Viper told him to relax, his body was healing, and putting stress on his soul would only make things worse. To the protagonist, none of that made any sense. The god said astral projection wasn't easy to explain. His soul had come there because his subconscious saw it as a safe place. It was dangerous, but with his life on the line, his instincts had made the right call. The Viper added that these things had been happening a lot lately. Danger tends to bring them out. As for getting back, his soul would return on its own once his body healed. He just had to pray nobody found it. Jake asked what would happen if someone did. The Viper flatly said he would cease to exist for good. Outside, Cecil was dragging MC's body somewhere safer, because that area was far too dangerous. He grumbled that nobody ever listened to him. Still, Jake should be thankful he freed him before blacking out. Even after being left alone with a bunch of dinosaurs, Cecil still managed to drive them off. They were lucky he'd been able to pull him into that cave. Cecil let out a deep sigh, not knowing what to do without the protagonist, and hoping he'd wake up soon. While they talked in the room, the Temple Master watched from outside. She wondered who could speak so casually with a sinister Viper. Maybe this was a test, and the Viper wanted her to defend its honor. Thinking that was the case, she pushed her way inside, announcing herself to the Viper, Mora. But she quickly realized she'd stepped into a private moment between friends. The Viper introduced her as Viridia, the one in charge of the mortals in that place. At last, she met the Viper's friend. His presence was far stronger than a normal mortal's, and she couldn't understand how he endured a god's aura. Jake just smiled and said it was nice to meet her. She apologized for interrupting, and the mood turned awkward fast. The Viper invited her to stay, since they were apparently about to talk about the time her ex-boyfriend tried to kill her. MC felt like this whole thing had become a weird, awful misunderstanding, but it was too late now. He'd been naive, and someday he'd collect his revenge. Jake tried to explain himself, but the Viper cut him off. He'd judged things badly, and someone as weak as him couldn't afford mistakes. Viridia trusted her patron completely. If it said something, then it had to be true. The Viper said followers were great to have, but terrible to talk with. So it asked him what he truly wanted deep down. He said he wanted to return to his body and keep living. The Viper told him to think bigger. That wasn't his full answer. He also wanted to settle things with his former friends, get revenge on the old man who stabbed through his chest, and kill Richard and William. But more than anything, he wanted a real fight. He wanted strong opponents and the thrill of beating them. He planned to grow stronger and stronger until, in the end, he could do whatever he wanted. The Viper agreed that freedom was worth chasing, but truly free people couldn't stay chained to the past. There was no freedom without power, and power always came at a price. Jake had to make sure no one ever trapped him again, and if they tried, he needed to crush those traitors like ants. One day he might stand on a mountain of corpses, and he had to make sure he was the last one standing. That, to the Viper, was real freedom. Then it noticed the Chosen One had started to glow. His soul was heading back to his body. Knowing it was time to part, the Viper said it hoped to see its friend again. Holding Jake's hands, it thanked him for the talk. Then the Viper asked Viridia what she thought. She couldn't deny it. She was completely captivated. That man was truly exceptional. Back in the cave, the boy kept exercising, showing a body shaped by Tremblone. It looked like someone had been taking the venom. Stizzle woke to the sound of Jake counting. The protagonist stayed locked in, doing sit-ups without slowing down. He'd already done an insane number of reps. Stizzle was stunned that his friend was alive. Then MC looked over with a smile and cheerfully wished him good morning. The two hugged, overjoyed. Stizzle had nearly thought he'd never see him again. Jake apologized for making him drag his body all the way there and said he owed him one. Stizzle admitted he was mad at first, but then he realized something. The protagonist had freed him before passing out. Maybe he hadn't done it on purpose, but that was what saved him. If MC had died, Stizzle would have been trapped in that necklace forever. In his final moments, he'd set Stizzle free. That felt like a kindness he could never repay. But Jake said he didn't need to. That's what friends do. Bringing up friendship, he asked if he wanted to talk about what happened. Stizzle said there was nothing to say. He'd made a mistake and had to learn from it. Stizzle apologized for convincing him to go, but meeting them wasn't the real mistake. The real mistake was being weak. If the protagonist had been strong enough, getting surrounded wouldn't have mattered. He was done treating the tutorial like a game. From now on, he would take it seriously. A system window appeared, showing a pile of unread messages. Since he'd ignored them until now, he decided to check. There were so many that even he was shocked. He'd gained experience from the players he beat, and one message especially stood out. He hadn't even realized Hayden had died. There was no way the poison alone should have been enough to kill him. On top of that, several other messages said he'd defeated more players. At first he thought maybe someone else had done it, but then he understood. It was Richard. Jake had just been used as a pawn in Richard's scheme. His anger toward that bastard became overwhelming. At least he'd gotten some points out of it. Then the system told him he had met every requirement to evolve his class. Since the message came on a golden screen, it had to be something special. The system asked if he wanted to start the evolution. If he wanted to stay alive, getting stronger was his only option. His class evolved into Ambitious Hunter, level 25. Jake loved the new name. This class chased real challenges, leaned into speed and strength, and promised greater power if he survived. He was especially happy about the bonus to perception and the extra damage against stronger enemies. That would help him catch up to the others. Throwing on his cloak, Jake said he couldn't waste any more time. Only 25 days remained in the tutorial, and he planned to hunt everything in that forest worth hunting. Caroline was desperate because Adam wouldn't speak to her. She insisted she acted for their own good because she couldn't trust MC. But Adam hated being used, and he hated even more that she'd lied to get an innocent man killed. She tried once again to say she'd done it for them, but after what happened to Casper, she had to be wrong. Adam started to say she still had him and Bertram, but even he no longer knew if he could trust her. Apologizing again, Caroline asked what he wanted her to do. He said he wanted to be alone and needed time to think. After that, he walked away from her. Richard had been nearby, listening to the whole argument. After risking everything, Caroline lost it all, and Jake still survived. Richard reminded her they were after something much bigger. He had let Hayden use his strongest spell on purpose, because it burned through his strength and left him exposed. Without that, Richard admitted he never would have beaten him. Now that Hayden was gone, his whole camp was falling apart, and Caroline asked why they were still targeting Richard. He said it wouldn't be much longer before he wiped out all his enemies. Still, that didn't add up. Jake was alive. None of them thought the boy could escape twice. Even so, the explosion proved their fears were real. And if he believed he had been wronged, nothing would stop him from taking revenge. Still, Richard said they'd be ready when he came. 2 hours had passed since William began working at the forge. If he'd shown up before Jake's hunt, he could have joined the ambush, and he was furious that the protagonist got away alive. Still, another attack was coming to finish off what was left of the enemy camp. That would give him a chance to let out his anger. Then the blacksmith came by to check on him. William said he was only staying busy. Out of everyone there, the blacksmith was the one he hated least. The man asked him to come to his cabin because he wanted to talk. It felt odd, since William had never seen where he lived. The blacksmith usually kept to himself. Inside, William noticed the place was very plain. The man clearly never cared about making it cozy. William asked what this was about. The blacksmith told him to wait, then found what he needed. He set a dish on the table and said he didn't want anyone hearing them. A blue light started glowing from it. A magic dome formed around them. The man told William not to worry. It was just a soundproof barrier to block eavesdroppers. William didn't care how he did it without being a mage. The blacksmith explained it came from his profession. He could use small enchantments. William asked what he wanted and why they needed a barrier. The blacksmith said they were talking because they shared a mutual contact. William first guessed Richard, but it wasn't him. The man said their connection wasn't a person at all. It was a god. As hard as that sounded to believe, he had been speaking with gods. Those beings were watching the people in the tutorial, and they could give rewards mortals normally could never get. It was another path to power and influence. He said he'd made contact with Camicus, the god of forges. William still didn't see what that had to do with him. Then the blacksmith explained that Camicus had an ally, Phareus, the god of metal, who had taken interest in William after offering him a class and being turned down. William admitted he hated the class name, though he liked the power it gave him. Even so, he had accepted one of the god's abilities, which linked them. William didn't like the thought of following anyone. The blacksmith told him he wouldn't survive the tutorial alone, and he could forge gear to make William stronger. Stronger even than Richard. That name caught William off guard. Then the blacksmith explained he hadn't entered the forest alone. He came with his son and daughter-in-law and promised to protect them, but Richard was the one who killed them. William actually felt sorry hearing that story, even though he used to think other people's pain meant nothing to him. The blacksmith said his son had been the same age as William, and he and his wife had truly loved each other. That was why he wanted revenge, but he wasn't strong enough to take it himself, so he saw a chance in William. His God had led him to the boy, giving him one shot to make his wish come true. The word love made William pause. He remembered Casper saying something like that before. William had never lost someone he loved, but now those words were starting to make sense. So he asked what the blacksmith wanted from him. The man raised his hands and told William to step back. That made William uneasy, because he still didn't understand how the blacksmith could do any of this. Without much warning, the man said he was summoning his personal forge. It was far better than the one in camp. Trying to make sense of it all, William asked what exactly he was doing. The blacksmith said a major battle was coming, and William had to be fully ready for it. William stayed there watching for what felt like forever. He couldn't even tell how many hours had passed, yet it somehow felt like only moments. The rhythm of the hammer almost put him in a trance. By the end, the blacksmith had made a full suit of armor, the finest William had ever seen. Outside, everyone else was getting ready to attack the enemy camp. Even the trader was set to go, while William stood there watching a real master at work. At last, the blacksmith finished. He told William to put the armor on. The moment William held it, he knew it was something special. The system said it was made for a talented user and could absorb and store mana. What caught his eye most was its ability to spread out impact. The blacksmith explained that a crushing hit wouldn't turn him into a mangled mess, because the force would be dispersed. He could take several blows without being hurt. William didn't know how to respond to a gift like that. For maybe the first time in his life, he felt grateful. But there was still a second part. There was more information tied to the armor, and the blacksmith wanted him to hear it only after everything else was done. William still didn't understand. Then the man asked if he would keep his promise and take that revenge, and William said yes. The blacksmith said he'd hidden his name from everyone in camp, but now he felt he could trust William. His name was Hermann Schmidt, his son was Gunnar Schmidt, and his daughter-in-law was Corinne. She had been pregnant with his grandchild when she died. William felt emotions he had never known before. The man's body began to glow, as he hoped his selfish wish would be granted, and his memory would live on. Only William could do that for him. William didn't understand the light and started asking what was happening. Herman said goodbye, wished him happiness in this new world, and hoped he would come to understand himself. The glow kept getting brighter. William shouted Herman's name. When the man's body dropped, William panicked over what had happened. Fear crept in, and he couldn't explain why he felt this way. Then Herman's body began to vanish, and tears started running down William's face. He didn't even know why he was crying. Not even his worst memories had ever made him feel like this. Maybe now he finally understood what his parents had felt then, something he had never been able to feel before. After all this time, it finally made sense, but he refused to let that feeling distract him. He looked back at the armor. When he picked it up, it melted into liquid in his hands, becoming something made for him alone. He could feel the power rising inside him. The armor was making him stronger. It was an epic tier item, filled with the blacksmith's final dream, usable only by the one chosen before his death. This masterpiece was Herman's whole legacy. William swore to show Richard what the two of them had created. Then he noticed a small note on the floor. He had nearly forgotten it. It seemed to hold a spell that could store sound. William lifted the note to his ear. As soon as he heard the message, his face changed in surprise. That man had been far more cunning than he looked. Later, Jake kept hunting in the forest. It had been a very good day for him. Cecil warned that MC was becoming scary strong. Fighting him would be a nightmare. Every level seemed to teach him something new about archery. He had reached level 46 as an alchemist, and level 38 as a human. Happy with that progress, Jake hoped to hit level 50 before the tutorial ended. Cecil asked how much time was left. Only 22 days remained, but something felt off. The number of survivors had dropped hard, and it was still falling right in front of them. Jake realized something huge was happening in the forest. Hours earlier that same day, the warriors had been getting ready. Their weapons were ready for battle. As far as they knew, their main enemy was already gone. Only Desmond remained, and he was probably looking for revenge. They had offered the others a chance to surrender, but after being refused, they decided they wouldn't risk another war. That night, they meant to end it for good. The fired-up crowd was eager for the fight. Richard was pleased with everything he had set in motion. He checked his system carefully. His personal quest was nearly complete. Soon he believed he would finally clear the tutorial. After that, the last real problem would be Jake. William might also become a problem now that he wasn't loyal anymore. So once Richard was done using him to wipe out the rest of his enemies, he planned to kill him too. He walked over and asked whether William had seen the blacksmith. William answered that the man didn't care for fighting, only for his forge. Richard called that a shame, since he would have been a powerful ally in battle. At least, he said, they still had William, his great friend. But William could barely hide how much he now hated Richard. At last, the army was ready and reached its target. A huge wall stood in their way, so they started shouting at the enemy. On the other side stood only one mage. He calmly waited for them to come closer. Richard announced that he would lead the charge himself. He got into fighting stance right away. His shield started glowing with blue power. A huge blast shot out from it. William was impressed. Peeking through the wall, he confirmed there was only one man outside, and that man was ready to strike back. He fired a spell at once. Richard shouted for his men to defend themselves. A powerful barrier rose and covered the whole army. More mages gathered, getting ready to attack again. Caroline knew the barrier wouldn't hold for long, and Richard warned the attack was coming, so he told everyone to move forward now. At the same time, the mages behind the wall started falling back. The biggest idiot started thinking this would be easy. Then a huge blast erupted behind his unit. He looked back and realized his army was surrounded, with archers behind them. His soldiers started to panic. Still, he ordered them to kill everyone. War was messy by nature. It wasn't some fair test of skill between trained fighters. It was just pointless bloodshed. The first ones targeted were the mages in the fight, because they were easiest to kill. After that, the archers started dropping too. The healers, meanwhile, were guarded heavily. But in the end, it turned out the same. Nothing stands out more in battle than a skilled knight. When the fighting was over, the survivor count had fallen hard. He told Desmond to give up, but the young man refused. After hearing that, Richard decided to grant that wish in his own way. But the ground around the mage started shaking, and then his body began to shine brightly. Expecting something bad, the fool had already put up a protective barrier. Caroline insisted nothing could break through it. He waited to see what would happen next. Then came the sound of blades, and he heard Caroline's weak voice. She had been stabbed by William. Even then, she still asked why he did it, but honestly, she had it coming. Her dead body turned into stone, and William called them all fools. A foolish woman, easy to control, now lay dead on the battlefield. Healers were always the first ones enemies tried to remove. The extras froze in shock at the betrayal. One of them rushed at William to kill him, but the boy had already summoned several daggers. Taking them down was easy. They fell like the disposable extras they were. Now only one target was left. Richard looked worn out from the battle. Even so, William came at him without mercy. Pretending not to understand, Richard asked what he was doing. William should have done this long ago. He knew he couldn't fight carelessly. The armor had made him stronger, but Richard was still a dangerous fighter. If William slipped up, he'd lose for sure. For now, the fight looked even. Richard warned that without him, William would be nothing. But William kept his focus on the fight. Richard reminded him again that he would have died on day one if not for his help. Everyone had seen how average he looked back then. But Richard claimed he saw his potential, and he clearly didn't like being repaid like this. William finally found an opening and struck in a way that stopped Richard's attack. Now the fool was hurt and on the ground. William told him he was nobody's puppet, and warned him never to look down on him again. Richard used that moment to grab sand and fling it at the boy's eyes. Hurt or not, he was still fighting. But William blocked the attack completely. The longer they fought, the stronger William felt. And it wasn't only because of the armor. Something else was feeding that power. He just couldn't tell what it was. Richard finally understood he was in real danger. So he tried talking his way out of it. That bought him enough time to draw out his full power. He refused to die here, especially not by William's hand. He bit down hard on his fingernail and crushed it between his teeth. William recognized it right away. This had to be some hidden skill, like Hermann Schmidt used. He was probably trading part of his life for a burst of temporary power. Completely furious, Richard charged straight at him. He was too fast. There was no time to dodge. Richard drove his blade into William's chest and thought it was over. William coughed up a huge amount of blood. He admitted the hit wasn't bad, but Richard was already too late. Using how close they were, William unleashed one of his hidden techniques. The swords scattered across the ground started to rise. Then they lined up in the air. Richard stared in shock as all those blades slammed into him. That was William's secret move. The attack meant to finish him for good. Trapped inside a storm of flying swords, he had nowhere to go. William gave the command, and the swords rushed Richard. The sphere of blades grew so huge it swallowed part of the forest until only a ruined clearing was left. With one eye gone and his arm torn away, he couldn't understand why William had gone this far. Everything had played out the way William wanted. To him, people were just chess pieces. But this was really revenge for Hermann Schmidt, who died because of Richard. Hermann Schmidt was the one who made that armor for him. At last, they had defeated all their enemies. After this, he would return to camp and stack the bodies high in honor of his friend, as proof they had finally won. Then he'd hunt down the archer, and by killing him, show the system who was truly the best there. But his body had no strength left. William collapsed unconscious too. That rush of emotion had been strangely fascinating, a gift from the system for someone who always wanted to understand other people. Now the floodgates were open. William once believed having no emotions made him better, but maybe those emotions could take him even higher. The mysterious figure said William still didn't have permission to die, forcing his heart to beat normally again. It ordered him to rise. His first job came when he was 16, working as a student monitor. He was basically babysitting adults. One school was especially rough. It sat in the slums and was packed with delinquent kids. Fights happened all the time, In the halls, those kids were already throwing punches. Still, he never backed down and always stepped in to stop them. Sometimes that meant using a little force himself. The problem was, he got hurt doing it. He came home with a new bruise almost every day. His father started worrying. He asked where the injuries came from, and Adam said they happened at the school where he worked as a monitor. He said it could have been worse, and he'd be fine soon. Truthfully, Adam hated that job, and badly wanted to work at his father's company. Anything was better than dealing with those rude kids, but his father didn't agree. Those children lived hard lives. Adam could never fully understand. After all, his son had been given every good thing since birth. He never had to worry about clothes or food. His father wanted him to learn about real life, use his privilege well, and maybe help change those kids' futures. More than anything, he wanted his son to become someone people could truly follow. Adam took that seriously and talked to the kids the next day. It wasn't simple, but he got them to work things out. Right after graduating, he was offered a job at his father's company, but he turned it down. He wanted to earn his own place, so he started as an intern. Not long after, he became a full-time worker. Eventually, he rose all the way to manager. He was naturally good with people, and knew how to lead, a leader others wanted to follow. But here, he wasn't strong or especially talented. He had already tried everything. The tutorial had taken everything from him. No matter what he did, his friends kept vanishing, and he couldn't protect them from what was coming. Not even the woman he loved, who was now dead. Looking at her body, he was crushed, with no idea who had done it. The last time they spoke, they had argued. He never got to say goodbye. Then his friend said he found someone among the bodies. It was William, and Adam instantly knew who caused all this. Filled with hate, he realized he should have expected William to be behind the massacre. William was still alive, but his body was badly damaged. His comrade asked what they should do next. Adam wanted only one thing, to kill him. He drew his sword without hesitation. After all William had done, ending him would be a favor to the world, because he was clearly a monster. But then Adam's hands started to shake. He couldn't make himself swing the blade. Even he didn't understand why he couldn't finish it. Logic told him he had to. If William lived, he'd come back for revenge. But Adam just couldn't do it. That place had broken everyone, and turned them into killers. With tears in his eyes, Adam refused to let it break him too. He wouldn't let hope die. Then the system told him his class had evolved. Adam was stunned. He had become the augur of hope, someone meant to help others understand their fate. But he didn't understand the message at all. More messages started coming in from different gods, but he couldn't make sense of them either. Bertram asked who they were from, but Adam couldn't answer. He could only feel something from them, so he began choosing one of the names. Each invitation carried a clear purpose. His friend asked what he planned to do, but Adam wasn't sure if this was really what he'd been waiting for. But this time in the tutorial could still mean something, a real chance to find where he belonged. Then a golden invitation appeared. The Sacred Mother was calling Adam to her realm. The invitation itself left him amazed, so he chose to accept it. In an instant, Adam was sent somewhere else, with no clue where he was. For a second he wondered if this was heaven. A golden-haired woman welcomed him right away. She was so stunning that Adam felt a little shy. She could tell he was struck by the healthy glow and power around her. And honestly, the sight was incredible. She pointed to a sofa and invited him to sit. Then she offered tea, and he quickly accepted. Knowing how confused he must be, she thanked him for accepting her invitation. After all, many gods had taken an interest in him. She had been watching him since he formed a bond with the sage, and he was also tied to the Viper's chosen hunter. Adam hadn't realized others had gone through anything like this. Lots of people evolved their classes, but not all of them reached a meeting like this. Still, those connections were only a small reason for her interest. Across the entire tutorial, only one person had never killed another human. That was exactly who she wanted, a kind guide who could reach people's hearts. Adam had no idea who the sage or the hunter were, and he wasn't even sure if she was trying to pull him into a religion. She explained that the sage had caught an old friend's eye, while the hunter had drawn the Viper's attention. She couldn't approach the hunter because of the Viper's influence, but she knew the two of them were friends. That made Adam wonder if she meant Jake. He asked what it meant that the Viper had awakened, and she said the evil Viper had existed since the dawn of time. It had stayed hidden for ages until the world's integration. Most likely, his friend was the one who stirred it. Adam asked if that was good news or bad. The goddess said only time could answer that, though she was glad it had come out of its mausoleum. The way she talked was so mysterious that Adam could barely follow. Even so, he still asked if all this was good or bad. She told him he worried too much about right and wrong. That answer would depend on what he did from here on. But since he had chosen her, she believed it would lead to good. Adam asked what he was supposed to do, and why she'd brought him there. She rose and said she wanted to give him both a blessing and a duty. Spreading her wings, she revealed the gift was her blessing. The duty was to serve her, and spread her word through the universe. The moment felt grand and overwhelming. Adam asked what message she wanted him to share. Her answer was simple: serve her and the sacred light. Her teaching stood for hope, justice, and what is right. People should treat each other fairly and learn to love their neighbors. The wicked should be punished, and others should be helped to become their best selves. Curious, Adam asked if she was God. She said yes, but not in the way he had always imagined. One day, even he could reach divinity. It might take ages, but if he followed her, she would guide him there. Now he had a lot to think about. A system window warned that time was almost up. If he agreed, he'd take her blessing and return to the tutorial. She couldn't keep him there much longer, so she asked for his answer. Adam figured he understood enough. He had spent his life drifting without a clear purpose, and the tutorial had nearly broken his mind. If this could lead him back to where he truly belonged, then he would accept the invitation without hesitation. The goddess was clearly pleased. She touched his forehead and gave him her blessing, hoping he would fulfill his fate. Now his intelligence and willpower had both increased. Back in the tutorial, his friend was shaking him in panic. Adam woke in his own body, wondering if the whole thing had just been a dream. Then the system window appeared in front of him. It was real. He really had met a god, but he was shocked to find that he could no longer attack at all. Every combat skill was gone. Still, something else was taking their place. The system was replacing everything properly. He gained a legendary skill called One More Light. Elsewhere, Jake was searching for something. The number of survivors had dropped hard. In only a few minutes, about 200 of them were gone. Cecil asked if he was worried. Jake couldn't deny it. Everyone except Adam had turned on him and nearly got him killed. He couldn't afford that mistake again. He needed more power, and there was only one move left. He was going after another Beast King. The system warned him again. He was entering a dungeon. Once inside, he realized the place was huge. It barely looked like a dungeon at all. He had expected another dark cave, but this place was something else. His target was the Great White Stag. It didn't look like the scariest monster he'd faced, but Cecil reminded him that antlered beasts were dangerous. Jake told Cecil to quit thinking like that. Then he pointed out the creatures gathered by the water. They were probably the Great Stag's servants. Level 65 was strong, sure, but he had expected even worse. Then the ground started shaking, and Jake grew uneasy. Huge hooves pounded the earth. He quickly realized he had judged this dungeon all wrong. He had finally found the boss. Wanting a better look, he moved closer, while Cecil instantly wanted back inside the necklace. The beast was drinking from the water, and it was easily the biggest one he'd ever seen. Its presence alone felt majestic. The smaller deer nearby looked like personal guards. This dungeon might really be worth the trouble. Then, one careless step snapped a twig. The sound instantly put the animals on alert. One of them began charging a huge ball of energy and fired it straight at the noise. The blast was devastating, way too dangerous to take lightly. Jake knew he had to be more careful. Fighting all of them together was impossible. After that, the animals went right back to feeding. 30 minutes later, he came up with a solid plan. He only noticed it once he really stopped and studied the area. There were 7 lakes arranged in a circle. At the center sat a bigger 8th lake, where the boss stayed. It hardly ever moved far from that spot. The real issue was the other deer. Every few minutes, they switched lakes in a clockwise pattern. That gave him a brief chance to ambush one group without warning the rest. The lakes would be his kill zones, and he had to use that opening. Now that he had it figured out, there was no point waiting. It was time to see if his idea actually worked. One deer drank from the lake, totally unaware. Jake readied his strongest arrow. Big targets were always best handled with his hardest hit. The arrow dropped the deer before it knew what happened. The protagonist then pulled out his daggers and rushed to finish the job fast. He had a little over a minute before the next group arrived. There was no room for mistakes. Each creature had to go down in one blow. At last, he felt that attack sequence was done. Cecil admitted it was pretty good. Jake wondered why they all gathered around these lakes. Since he still had a few seconds, he checked the water. What he found was strange. It wasn't visible from above, but holes sat at the bottom of the lakes. They were probably linked to the larger central lake. Still, he couldn't guess why the lakes were built like that. Then his perception warned him something was wrong. The deer he had beaten were still alive. He knew his attack should have killed them. They had to be healing, because the damage was almost gone. He needed to finish them before they warned the boss, but they were moving too fast, and he might miss. His time was almost up, so he fired anyway. Just like he feared, he missed, and the shot smashed into a boulder. That immediately alerted the stronger beasts. Even the dungeon boss noticed. Jake had just put himself in serious danger. He took off at once, looking for cover. Now the whole herd was furious. Cecil was panicking too. Jake admitted he had panicked. He wasn't ready to loose that arrow so fast. Now he had to dodge non-stop. He needed to move fast because attacks were flying in from every side. Cecil asked if he'd drawn the boss's attention too, but the boss stayed at the center lake, calmly drinking. It was like it had left the problem to its minions. Jake just hoped there was somewhere to hide. Then he looked back and saw the herd had stopped chasing him. He had no idea why they quit. There had to be a reason they broke off the hunt. Jake called Cecil out because he wanted to check something. Since she could fly, he asked what she saw. To her, it all looked like a giant plane. He also asked what the creatures were doing. She said they were all heading back to the lakes. That told MC something important. Maybe the lakes made a boundary the beasts couldn't cross. If he stayed far enough away, they wouldn't chase him. When Cecil saw him climbing a wall, she asked what he was doing. Jake said he needed higher ground to test an idea. His bow's normal range wasn't great, but from up there, he might get a clean shot. If the beasts really couldn't leave the lakes, he could kill them safely from a distance. If he's wrong, he has to put everything into his first shot. He coats the arrow with his strongest poison, and adds the new skill he just got. Worst case, this is his only chance, so he aims for the strongest beast. Jake gets ready, and raises his bow into position. The target finally lines up in his sight. He has to stay locked in so the shot doesn't miss. Once the skill is fully charged, he lets the arrow fly. It tears forward without slowing down. Now it's time to use his new skill. Mid-flight, the arrow splits in two, letting him kill 2 creatures from far away. The dungeon boss instantly sensed something coming. Without moving, its eyes flashed bright. A powerful magic barrier formed around it. The arrow couldn't break through the shield. Instead, the shot got knocked off course and struck a creature passing by. The others noticed right away, but the dungeon boss stayed completely safe. Jake realizes it only protects itself and doesn't care about the others, so he'll keep attacking from a safe range. It didn't go as planned, but one more creature is dead. He can deal with the boss later. For now, he'll sharpen his aim. The daylight still holds, and his arrows keep slicing through the air. The creatures can't dodge them, and Jake drops them one after another. None of them see death coming. From up there, the whole lake area is in range. He keeps firing all day, bringing the creatures down with steady efficiency. Cecil points out they're running low on poison. Using that skill this long wears him out more than he expected. By the end of the day, every creature is dead, and only the dungeon boss is left. It's still strange that it never cared when its followers died. That makes Jake think it's planning something. Still, since it hasn't moved yet, he sets the worry aside and decides to rest. He says he'll make a fire, but Cecil cuts in and tells him to look. The dungeon boss had started doing something new. It moved to the middle of the main lagoon, and its horns began to glow. At once, the other lagoons lit up too. Even the dead creatures started glowing. That was definitely bad news. Marks spread across the ground until a huge magic circle covered the whole area. Jake knows he has to move now. He tells Cecil to stay on the rock, though she's still worried about him. The lagoon water is churning hard, and as the seconds pass, the dungeon boss keeps getting bigger. He has to stop it before it grows as tall as a skyscraper. He knows the ritual has already started, but not how to stop it. The beast seems to be drawing power from the lagoons, like it's charging itself. If he destroys the lakes, he might cut off that power. The problem is time. He needs an answer fast. Then he remembers the holes linking the whole area together. That gives him his answer. If all the water connects, he doesn't need to ruin every lagoon. All he has to do is poison one of them. The problem is, he already used almost all his poison. Luckily, he saved something stronger for an emergency. It's the venom gland from the monster he killed in the other dungeon. That poison is strong enough to get past even his own resistance, and far deadlier than anything he could make here. He knew saving that gland would matter someday. That day is now. He breaks it open and pours the poison into one lagoon. The toxin spreads at once through the connected water. In the main lagoon, the dungeon boss dives under. The poison races through the water so fast that the color starts changing too. Jake waits to see if he guessed right. Then he starts celebrating, thinking the plan worked. The magic circle begins to fade, and Cecil is shocked that he actually stopped the ritual. The dungeon boss's eyes blaze bright. The hardest part is over. Now comes the fun part. Poisoned and enraged, the creature goes wild. Jake charges in with his daggers out. He can't beat it with arrows alone, especially not in a long fight. He's set on ending this fast, preferably with one strike. The pressure triggers his bloodline, his reflexes spike, and he slips past the creature's attack, opening the chance to cut into it from below. Jake lands a deep, clean slash across its body. The system announces he defeated the great deer and awards tutorial points for it. With that, the dungeon's main objective is complete. Cecil can't believe he killed it in one hit. Jake admits that if he'd reacted half a second later, those horns would have nailed him. He only won because the poison weakened the beast and slowed it enough for him to get close safely. He is glad he brought down another dungeon boss. Then he notices the corpse starting to glow. A crystal was hidden inside it. Corrupted lunar fragment. Its energy is unstable, and it won't last long. Maybe the ritual was making that fragment, and Cecil asks what he'll do with it. He doesn't know yet, but he's sure it'll matter later. The system tells him the King of Beasts has noticed him, but he still needs to defeat 2 more dungeon bosses. The idea of a king grabs Jake's attention. That was way more interesting than he expected. Meanwhile, other players reach the abandoned battlefield. One of them walks over to the bodies on the ground. Since their owners are dead, he decides to loot their gear. When he spots William's body, he really wants the armor. He calls his friend over to help carry it, but they can't lift it at all. It seems stuck. They keep trying to move the body until William suddenly wakes up. A few more survivors die right there. William walks away, still badly hurt. He was barely aware when he killed them, and now he realizes he's still in the forest. He's so weak he can hardly feel his legs, but none of that matters. He lived. He should have died, and yet he didn't. To him, that proves fate chose him. Maybe that's joy, and even he's surprised by what he's feeling. He knows how powerful emotions can be, because he remembers exactly what Casper did, but he also knows they can twist him into something cursed enough to make him wish for death. He swears that won't happen again. He'll be the one who wins, and the true form of perfection. Back at camp, people keep asking about what Adam went through. He wishes he could explain more, but he barely understood it himself. What matters is that it gave them hope. Fighters like Richard were gone, and now all they had was each other, so they needed to learn to trust. Adam promises that if they believe in him, he'll lead them out. That only makes some of them more uneasy. Even he knows it sounds crazy, because he has no proof to make them believe. Joanna Elkman speaks up and says she trusts him. He has led her ever since they arrived in the forest. She doesn't know anything about these gods, but she knows Adam's heart is in the right place, and if he says there's a way out, then she sees no reason to doubt him. The others start talking it over. Little by little, some choose to trust him. If he really can end this, following him is worth it. Grateful for their faith, Adam promises he won't let them down. At last, it feels like his effort is paying off. Now he finally has a purpose there, and the system rewards him for what he's done. He's gained a lot of levels in just a few days, which feels like proof he's on the right track. He even cleared the first mission he got after meeting the goddess, and he hopes the reward can help everyone. It won't be easy until they get back to Earth, but he believes they can do it. Peering into the deep hole, Jake figures it's huge, but probably only about 10 meters down. Cecil can't even see the bottom and asks how he can. The protagonist says it might be a dungeon. To find out, he decides to jump, leaving Cecil horrified. She can't believe he's diving into another dungeon already. They barely made it through the last one, but their time there is running out, and not many people are left. The forest beasts don't matter anymore. All that's left is hunting the remaining dungeon bosses, because a king is waiting, and Jake isn't ignoring that. Cecil wishes she'd found a slower, lazier human than this one. But there's no time to waste, so he heads into the hole. This dungeon is called the Forgotten Sewer. Inside, it's far stranger than Jake expected. He never thought a place like this would exist in the tutorial. For the system though, anything seems possible. The whole place is soaked in magic, and Cecil can barely see. Before MC can finish speaking, he smacks his head on a post. Embarrassed, he asks Cecil to act like that never happened. Still, it isn't really his fault. Even with his perception, moving through here is hard. The whole sewer feels drowned in mana. Jake concentrates harder, trying to sense anything around him. Bit by bit, he starts getting a feel for the place. He can hear water dripping against a broken brick wall, but nothing else seems unusual inside the sewer. He tells Cecil to go back into the pendant, since exploring blind could be dangerous. The place feels like a maze, and he couldn't even tell which way he'd already gone. Every path looked exactly the same. Cecil asked if he'd found anything yet. Jake felt like he'd been wandering forever. He was ready to get out of that dungeon when his senses picked up something. That immediately made Cecil nervous. He raised his bow and told him to stay calm. Something was hiding behind the wall. Knowing a fight was coming, he readied his arrows. He should have noticed earlier, but the mana there was so thick. Then the creature attacked, and he had to react fast. His arrow struck it with little trouble. The thing dropped, and it was somehow even uglier up close. It looked like a mole, easily the nastiest thing he'd seen so far. At least it was dead, but then his senses warned him again. There were more of them nearby, so Jake let his bow do the talking. Another mole went down. With the area so hard to read, one managed to bite him. He answered right away with an arrow that killed it. That wasn't enough to shake his focus. He kept picking the creatures off. After a hard fight, he finally wiped them all out. Cecil could tell his friend was worn out, and hoped that was the end of it. Jake knew it wasn't. One more creature was still there. He could still feel it behind the wall. The whole time, it felt like something was watching him. Then it spoke, asking why he'd killed the others. Hearing it talk, the protagonist asked who it was. The creature didn't answer. Instead, it gave off a deadly aura, and asked who he was. It wanted to know if he served the king, and why he'd come. So that was the king the system mentioned. Jake told it straight. He was here to beat the dungeon boss, then kill the forest king. The creature called him a cub. The king was powerful, and this human was weak. MC felt it moving closer as his senses sharpened. He drew an arrow and laughed at being called a cub, because he was about to prove otherwise. He fired at the creature, but then sensed a blade swing. One slash split the arrow out of the air. The creature called itself a nest guardian and repeated that the human was weak. Back at the camp, everything had been torn apart. William walked through the wreckage and noticed there were no guards. Things must have fallen apart after Richard left. He also had no clue where everyone had gone. Before long, he found Adam, who noticed right away that William was still hurt. The last time they'd met, he'd been in awful shape. William asked if Adam had really gone to the battlefield. He had, but he wasn't talking about body wounds. Adam looked troubled, yet he still chose what he thought was right. That only confused William more. He guessed Adam meant someone had tried to talk him out of killing him, but Adam asked what he was even talking about. William said the boy had already chosen his road, and words wouldn't change that. A little more sure of himself, he asked Adam for one favor: stop living. First though, he wanted to know where the others were. Adam answered that the others had already found their place, and soon he would too. Checking the system, William saw only 4 survivors were left in the tutorial. Thinking Adam had killed them, he called him the real psychopath there, but Adam said that wasn't it, and told him to come see. When William saw the bodies on the ground, he froze. Adam asked if he understood now. They had trusted him to send them to the sacred land, and he was willing to carry that burden. To William, that sounded insane. Maybe it was, Adam admitted, but all they could do was fight fate, and hope was enough for him. Done with the talk, William said he'd wanted to do this for a long time. The 2 young men took a prayer-like stance. William chose to strike them both. He cut off their heads, and their bodies dropped lifeless to the ground. Right after that, what was left of Adam started to fade. William had no idea what he was seeing. He figured it was some kind of spell, since the other bodies were vanishing too. Now he was curious about this so-called sacred land. Either way, he told them to enjoy it. At last, his business there was settled. Now only one archer remained. Back in the dungeon, the creature kept coming at Jake, and he knew talking was over. Its blow smashed into the ground with enough force to break it apart, but he dodged in time. Even then, it was a close call. Resting its sword on its shoulder, the creature mocked him again for being weak. Jake could tell that sword hit insanely hard and its user was unbelievably fast. He couldn't keep his distance and depend only on the bow. That left him with one choice. When it saw the daggers in his hands, the creature seemed amused. Jake knew he'd have to get in close to bring this monster down. Both of them charged, each ready to prove who was really weaker. Their weapons crashed together in a shower of sparks, and the protagonist felt just how strong the creature really was. That pressure awakened his bloodline. Now the primal hunter could trade blows evenly with it, landing several cuts of his own. He took a few hits back too, and the battle only got more brutal as their attacks came faster and closer. Even with all that danger, Jake showed no fear. The creature lined up a heavy slash. MC blocked it. The 2 now looked evenly matched. That thrill only pushed the primal hunter further. The creature felt the same, and didn't back down either. When they finally pulled apart, it admitted the human was stronger than expected. Still, the king was far beyond him. After all, the king was the true apex predator. Jake noticed from its grip that it was charging another attack. That gave him the opening to switch back to his bow. The creature declared that this would decide their fight. He wanted to see if it could really say that while powering up its strongest move. Their bursts of energy slammed into each other. Both were locked in with total focus. After the clash, blood poured out. The creature had lost a limb, yet still thought it had won. Then it understood how badly it was hurt, and knew the fight was over. Jake walked up and said the battle had been good, and that it had fought well. Shaken, the creature asked if he truly meant to kill the king. The protagonist answered that he would, or die trying. It confessed that the king had imprisoned it there, and it hated him for that. If MC spared it, it would help him get revenge. Long ago, it had created a curse. Now it would give that curse to Jake to help him defeat the Forest King. It wanted revenge through him, and though he still hesitated, he promised to do it. As its body faded away, it thanked him for that promise. For beating the Nest Guardian, the protagonist earned several tutorial points. Cecil said that last fight had been completely insane. The small sphere was made of dark mana, the creator's final hope for revenge on the Forest King, filled with the hatred of that nest. Since he owed his enemy that much, Jake said he'd find a way to use it. At last, they got out and saw sunlight again. MC stretched and said he could finally rest a bit. Then a strange feeling hit him. He instantly pulled out his daggers. Jake demanded to know who was there, and a voice answered. It was William. He'd found him, and asked if his rival had missed him. Furious at the sight of him, he demanded to know what he was doing there. William acted like that question was ridiculous, but the protagonist didn't get what he meant. William said he should know. Only 2 survivors were left now. That meant their fight would decide the true champion. Still confused, Jake asked what he'd done. Only then did MC realize the tutorial really had just 2 survivors left. It was almost impossible for him to believe. William grinned like a maniac, laughing at the fact he hadn't even checked the survivor count. Then he revealed he'd killed Adam the day before. That sent Jake into a rage, and William kept going, saying he took Adam's head just like all the others. Before he could finish, the protagonist grabbed him by the head. It was time to stop that sick kid for good. MC hadn't made many friends growing up, but there was one person he was truly close to. That boy's name was Patrick. They bonded over the same hobbies and loved reading the same stuff. Their favorite story was The Tomb Dancer. That issue sold out fast, but Patrick managed to get one, so both of them ended up with a copy. They shared almost everything, even food. They liked dressing alike too, and they were into the same games, so when Patrick asked to borrow his magazine, lending something back felt normal. A week later, Jake asked for his game back. Patrick nervously asked for a little more time, and he asked what was wrong. Patrick said he just wanted to play a bit longer. He was traveling that day and wanted a game to bring with him. Then Patrick admitted he didn't have it with him, so he couldn't return it. Jake said he could just go to Patrick's house to get it, but he could tell his friend was acting weird. Finally, Patrick confessed that the game was broken. The protagonist could barely believe it, and Patrick apologized. It may sound small now, but they didn't talk for 2 weeks. Then during vacation, Patrick said he had something for him. But when Jake went to meet his friend, Patrick was gone. Later, MC found out he'd transferred to another school. It took years for him to learn the truth. The game had been stolen from Patrick. Some idiots took it the very day he was supposed to give it back. Patrick had even scraped together enough money to replace it. Then it got stolen again. That time, he was beaten so badly his parents sent him away. Maybe he hid the truth because he didn't want Jake dragged into it. What he did after learning that was the strangest part. He did nothing, didn't even try to find Patrick. He never said sorry for leaving him behind, or admitted he respected what Patrick tried to do. Jake just kept living like none of it had happened. That was the kind of person he had become. He was someone who just accepted his own failures, a coward who ran from hard things. But that wasn't him anymore. Fueled by rage, Jake started smashing William's face in. Each hit landed so hard it shook the ground. Even Cecil was getting worried. The protagonist was far past the point of stopping, and he kept slamming his fists into William. Cecil noticed a blue light around Jake's hands, but had no idea what it was. The battle never really started. It turned into a one-sided slaughter. It was like something inside MC had finally broken free, and it came out brutally. In that moment, Jake was pushing past every limit, and William was the one paying for it. The sound of the blows spread through the forest. Even the animals heard it. The force of each strike made the earth tremble. Soon, Jake's hands were covered in blood. Cecil finally warned him that the thing in front of him was just a corpse now. He stepped in front of him and pulled him back to his senses. It was over. There was nothing left to do. Stunned, the protagonist asked what he'd done. Then grief hit him. None of his friends were alive anymore. They had all died in that place. Adam and Casper were gone. Even Caroline, who nobody really cared about, was dead too. No one was left. Jake was alone. Cecil told him they needed to move. Staying there wouldn't help, but MC said he didn't want to go anywhere. Cecil insisted he couldn't stay there forever. Before Cecil could touch him, time stopped. Even falling leaves hung frozen in the air. A man walked over to William's body and said everything had become a mess. He added that he was deeply disappointed by what had happened. Putting a hand over William's face, he said they'd try again soon. The Viper said stealing was ugly, and it was there to stop that. Velastromo answered that it didn't matter. This was his fault. The Viper had warned him not to touch its chosen one yet, and now he'd lost his own. The Viper stepped closer and warned that taking the body would come with a price. The old man asked what it wanted to do with it, but the Viper said that was for its chosen one to decide, and if he had a say, then so did it. The old man asked what the god wanted. The Viper said if he took the body, he'd owe it a favor. The old man replied it wasn't that simple. He offered to repay the Viper's chosen one, but the god said it still wouldn't let him go near the boy. He had two choices: leave the body, or owe the Viper a favor. The man argued that everything there was his responsibility, since his chosen one was the one who ruined the tutorial. Out of patience, the Viper said it wouldn't say it again. Realizing he couldn't change its mind, the old man chose to owe the god a favor, and reached for William's body again. Then time began moving once more. The Viper muttered that all of this was a pain. Jake asked who that was, which surprised the Viper since time had been frozen, but his bloodline was still active, so he had sensed everything. The Viper told him to keep that secret. Bloodlines were rare, and his looked especially strong. The protagonist didn't care about that right now. He wanted to know who the old man was and what happened to William's body. The Viper said he was a god named Eversmile, a lunatic who now owed Jake a favor. MC hated that William's body had been taken, but the Viper reminded him a favor from a god was huge, and if it helped at all, his friends weren't all dead. Some were, but Adam, Bertram, and even Casper had somehow made it to the other side of the tutorial alive. He couldn't understand how that was possible. When it came to strong classes, Adam was special. As an augur, he was very hard to kill. As for Casper, Jake would have to see that for himself. William, meanwhile, would be brought back too, since he was also chosen by a god. The Viper said it had done everything it could to give its chosen one a shot at revenge. It was the reason the two met, and it had no regrets about how it ended. The protagonist thought the system hated interference. The Viper said it tried to interfere as little as possible, and so far that had worked. Jake then asked what the old man meant when he said they had ruined the tutorial. The Viper noted that he had a lot of questions. It said showing him would be easier than explaining, and when it touched his face, his vision lit up. This was the story of two main players. One entered with friends, and one entered alone. The one by himself quickly found a way to wipe out the others. The other had it much harder, because his group was attacked on day one. That night, two of his friends were supposed to die, Jake and Joanna Elkman. But that isn't what happened. At least, that's what should have happened. While dealing with that loss, Adam was meant to team up with Richard and Nicholas. Then MC beat the archer, and that was when he started changing the story. From there, A chain of manipulation began that would have ended with Richard falling. Nicholas was talented, but too weak in a straight fight, so his rise happened faster. Eventually, he would keep going until he was the only one left. No one would remain to stop him, and Eversmile would gain his strongest disciple. But that future never happened. Everything changed because of one variable. A hunter with an unknown bloodline survived a fight he was supposed to lose. That's why Eversmile saw this tutorial as ruined. Still, in both versions, Jake's friends ended up dead. He shouldn't blame himself. He snapped back that he could have acted differently, but the Viper told him he could have died too. The protagonist said that wasn't the point. He at least wanted to try, instead of being a coward. The Viper told him he had done nothing shameful. He only wanted to avoid other people's troubles. MC didn't see it that way. That weakness was still his to face. Jake said he wouldn't go insane and start ignoring the people who mattered to him. No one was his burden unless he chose them to be. He told the Viper he didn't want it to leave sad and alone until the end of time. That made the god pause, but he still had one more thing to say. If he dies in battle someday, he wants it to stay that way. Cecil didn't understand what he meant. Jake made it clear. If he got revived, it would cheapen everything. He didn't want some hidden divine backup. He wanted his battles to matter, to risk something real, and he still had a dungeon boss to beat. Cecil tried to say something, but the Viper told him to wait. Its chosen one had been through too much, and things were only going to get worse from here. Cecil didn't get what that meant. The Viper chose not to explain, because Jake wouldn't understand yet. But as a god, it could bend fate a little, and glimpse the future. When it brought those two together, it already knew how that fight would end. It had also seen a little farther ahead, and what it saw was enough. Before the tutorial ended, the protagonist would fight the king of the forest, and he was meant to lose. Elsewhere, the master of a temple knew the tutorial was nearly over. She asked how the chosen one was doing. He was doing well, in a way. She didn't know what that was supposed to mean. After what he did to the other chosen one, things had changed. The boy barely talked now, and he was killing far more creatures, which sped up his path to the final dungeon boss, who stood no chance against him. The Viper didn't fully mind that, but it could see its chosen one growing colder. He looked empty, like a machine with one goal: finish everything, and then face the king of the forest. Only a few hours remained before the tutorial ended. Cecil asked what the plan was for tomorrow, and Jake said nothing had changed. The king of the forest would appear, and beating him was all that mattered. Cecil asked if something was bothering him. MC stared at the fire, lost in thought. He could talk to Cecil if he wanted. Anyone could tell he wasn't really fine. Everything in this tutorial had led here. If he beat the king of the forest, it would all mean something. Jake said it with total confidence. He wouldn't lose. Cecil went quiet, because he knew what was supposed to happen. Since they needed sleep, he told him goodnight. Then, after searching for the words, Cecil said he was truly thankful for everything the protagonist had done. Jake didn't understand why. But without him, Cecil would still be stuck in the pendant, and worse, still all alone. Because of MC, he got to spend all that time with a real friend. Even with how hard everything had been, he owed him everything. Now it was time to let him rest. The protagonist said he was grateful too, and glad to have Cecil with him. They bumped fists again, but Cecil still couldn't forget what the Viper had said, that Jake was fated to lose. More than anything, he hoped the god was wrong. The next morning, they heard it. Jake didn't know what made the sound yet. It hit with the force of an earthquake. He had to find the source, which made Cecil nervous. Following his instincts, MC headed straight toward it, certain that whatever was there was massive. Then he saw something enormous. Standing before him was the king of the forest. The king said he knew who he was, because the hunter had gone far beyond what anyone expected. But this was where that path ended. Then the system gave him a mission. The protagonist could choose how his story would end. He could leave the tutorial safely, keep everything he earned, and get 50 million extra tutorial points. Or he could fight the king of the forest and risk dying. If he won, he'd get 300 million tutorial points. Jake understood he had a safe way out, but he also had the chance to challenge the monster for a much bigger prize. To him, it barely felt like a choice. He'd never back down from a fight, but he wasn't stupid. Even without using any skills, he could tell this thing was insanely dangerous. So Jake faced a hard choice. He thought back to what he'd said the night before, and how sure of himself he'd been. He couldn't lie to himself anymore, so he chose. MC told the king of the forest he had one request, and the king agreed to hear it. He asked to fire a single arrow first, just to learn the real gap between them. The creature liked that idea. The boy wanted to witness a king's power. It agreed to grant that request. This was no trick. Jake wasn't going to waste it on some casual shot. Instead, he decided to push himself to the limit. His strongest attack carried his deadliest poison. This was the peak of everything he'd built up, his best possible strike. He believed it could kill anything, maybe even the king of the forest. Jake let the arrows fly. The king of the forest watched with interest. The hit triggered a huge explosion. Dust blasted back, forcing him to cover his face. He looked through the shockwave and saw the king of the forest completely unharmed. That wasn't what Jake expected. The creature had caught the arrow between its fingers. It called the attack interesting, but said that against the king of the forest it meant nothing. Still, it admitted one thing impressed it. A weak human had actually touched its body. Jake had been allowed one strike, and the creature mocked him for wasting it. He'd been offered a chance to surrender, and now he'd chosen his own end. Then the creature attacked, firing a projectile meant to drag out the protagonist's pain. MC knew he had to react fast or die on the spot. Then the primal hunter awakened. He didn't expect his bloodline to trigger then, but it let him dodge in time and immediately fire back. The king of the forest warned that speed like that still wasn't enough. Jake never got a real opening. All he could do was fight to stay alive. A brutal hit sent him crashing into a boulder. He was already badly hurt inside. Blood ran from his mouth as the creature sneered, calling him pathetic. It said it wasn't some mindless beast and had expected more from a hunter. Jake shouted for it to shut up, while the king of the forest mocked him and wondered if he could dodge the next one. Then it launched the same attack again. Jake could only slip through the shadows, vanishing just before it hit. He knew he had to stay far away from that monster. This time, he managed to fire several arrows back. Seeing the shot, the king of the forest said it wouldn't save him. With a clap, it knocked the arrows aside and told him to think better. The shockwave alone shattered them in midair. So far, nothing Jake tried had worked. He realized his bow alone wasn't enough. He needed more space to think of a plan. The king of the forest called running the clearest sign of cowardice and said hiding wouldn't help. Soon, explosions started tearing through the forest. Cecil climbed onto a higher rock, hoping that spot would keep him safe. As the blasts echoed around him, his worry kept growing. Whatever was happening, it was no small fight. He became deeply afraid for Jake. The protagonist knew that if he couldn't hurt this creature, he had no way to win. After all, something like armor had to be protecting it. His strongest shot had done nothing. The king of the forest said he already knew where MC was hiding. He just couldn't understand why the hunter kept running from the end. Then Jake finally noticed something that might change everything. The creature kept taunting him, saying he was holding on to false hope and that the future couldn't be changed. According to the king, defeat was impossible. Then he realized the hunter had escaped again. As it prepared another attack, the king started saying goodbye to the human. New explosions ripped through the forest. It was sure not even Jake could have survived that. Now only the true king of the forest remained. At the center of the blast, a black sphere was left behind. It started cracking open. Confident in its power, and curious to see more, the king of the forest walked closer. Dark shadows suddenly wrapped around him. This was the item the bitter creature had given Jake. It had taken a long time to prepare that backup plan. He only hoped it would matter in this fight. The king started complaining that his body was burning. The mole declared he wasn't a king anymore, and the creature couldn't understand what had happened. The outer layer of its body was melting. This might be Jake's only opening. At last, the creature admitted its opponent was dangerous. It had to finish this before things got worse. The protagonist's bloodline flared again, and he sensed that his enemy had slowed down a lot. Now he could clearly track its movements. For the first time, Jake saw a real chance to win. He chose to use the lunar stone fragment next, the item he got after beating a dungeon boss, an unstable but terrifyingly strong artifact, made through a ritual. The fragment pierced the king of the forest. Jake drove it in even deeper. He put everything he had into deciding this fight. For the first time, fear showed in the creature's eyes. A huge flash exploded through the forest. Cecil had no idea what happened. The light was so bright he couldn't see. When it finally faded, thick dust filled the air. Even injured, the king was still standing. Jake couldn't understand how it was still intact. Now the creature was furious. Those pathetic beasts and that lowly human disgusted him. He was done playing around. He wouldn't let this drag on any longer. It was time to kill his enemy. The creature couldn't understand how it had been hurt at all. A human shouldn't have been able to do any of this. From birth, he had always been the king, above everyone else. The system placed him in the forest to battle the dungeon bosses, and he defeated every one of them. None had ever been stronger than him. After that, he became the forest's one true king and the final boss of the tutorial. Yet this tiny human had pushed him that far. That human had made him careless, and in a strange way, he was thankful, because he never meant to use this. But now the king had no choice. He told MC this was a victory he should be proud of. MC didn't know what that energy was, only that it looked like an attack. Then something strange happened to the creature's mask. The king had never planned to show his true identity. It wasn't something revealed lightly, but now he would show Jake what real superiority looked like. He tried to see it, but the wind was too fierce. His feet scraped across the ground, and the moment he saw the creature's true face, a mental attack slammed into him. Blazing pain tore through his head. It felt like his soul was being ripped apart. Not just Jake. Every living thing nearby felt it too. Even far away, Cecil sensed the attack. The distance didn't protect him. Neither of them could endure this much longer. Jake grabbed his head and groaned in pain. It felt like madness itself was swallowing him, his whole body filled with panic and pain. The king said the protagonist had fought well, but this was the end. MC still refused to quit. He'd suffered too much to stop now. He had to win, no matter the price. But his body finally gave out. His injuries worsened as the king of the forest began saying his final goodbye. Jake dropped to the ground, unable to move. The Viper's vision had come true. Its chosen one really was meant to lose this fight. The result had been set before the battle even started. Then, like what happened with William, the system started a countdown. Something inside Jake had finally broken loose, like a seal inside him had burst. As the countdown kept rising, he slowly went beyond all his limits. His fingers twitched. Meanwhile, the creature backed away from the fallen hunter. Then it looked again and realized something had changed. Jake's body was no longer on the ground. He had awakened another new ability. Even his eyes had changed completely. The protagonist broke past his limits and smashed the king with savage force. The creature kept a straight face, but the pain was obvious. The blow launched it far away. Jake didn't wait to see what came next. The king noticed his speed had risen wildly, yet the hunter kept hitting him again and again without stopping. No one had ever lived after seeing his true form, but he realized he was mistaken. This hunter hadn't survived, because what stood before him was no longer an ordinary human. It was a beast moving on pure instinct to survive. That made it even more shocking, because his enemy had become a true monster. Jake stood over the creature's dead body. His face showed nothing. His hands were still covered in blood. With the battle over and all his strength gone, he collapsed. The tutorial was finally over. In the divine realm, a god wondered whether the hunter had won. It was unbelievable that the boy had changed fate itself. The Viper celebrated with joy. Even it had doubted, but its chosen one had done the impossible. The woman asked if he was really dead, and the Viper said yes. His new skill had only kept his body fighting after death. To her, that made it all seem pointless. But the Viper said that moment meant everything. His chosen one had proved himself, not just to the people in the tutorial, but to beings across the whole multiverse. The sad part was that Jake might never get his reward. She asked if the god planned to bring him back. The god said no. That had been MC's own choice. Though the system may have something else in store for him, his body stayed still on the ruined battlefield. Since the fight ended, he hadn't moved at all. His eyes stayed closed, and not a single part of him stirred. A long time passed before anything changed. Then his face gave a small twitch. Jake's mind was somewhere else. At last he opened his eyes. He found himself seated at a table. He couldn't tell if he was dead or alive. Still, it looked like he had made it somehow, even if he had no idea why. That's where this video ends. If you don't want to miss the next part, turn on notifications, and I'll see you next time here on this YouTube channel.